1 week after my grandmother's funeral, her doctor called me at 9 in the evening and told me to come to his office alone. He said there was something wrong with her test results, something that should have been caught before she died. I started to ask what he meant. He cut me off. "Don't tell your sister," he said. "Don't tell your father. Don't tell anyone you're coming here. Your life may depend on this." My grandmother was 82. She collapsed in her home on a Tuesday in April. The hospital called it a stroke. The death certificate said natural causes. I believed every word of it. She had a heart condition. She was old. These things happen. But standing in that doctor's office, staring at the numbers on the lab report he slid across his desk, I stopped breathing. Everything I thought I knew about my grandmother's death rearranged itself in front of me like furniture in a room I no longer recognized. I need to go back to the funeral. The day I first noticed something was wrong. Hollywood Cemetery sits on a hill above the James River. Old oaks draped with Spanish moss, iron fences green with age, tombstones going back to the Civil War. My grandmother chose her plot decades ago, right beside her daughter. My mother. The woman who died when I was 12 and left me in a house with a father who didn't know what to do with a grieving child and never bothered to learn. My name is Avery Thompson. I'm 34. I'm an architect at a small firm in Churchill, Richmond. I design affordable housing, modest buildings, tight budgets, the kind of work that doesn't make you rich but lets you sleep at night. I drive a Honda with 140,000 miles on it. I live alone above a coffee shop on East Gray Street. Everything I have traces back to one person. My grandmother, Margaret Hayes. She raised me after my mother died. She paid for my education. She drove 45 minutes each way to watch me accept my diploma and cried harder than I did. She was the only person in my family who ever looked at me and saw someone worth fighting for. The casket was white wood with brass handles. Simple. Gardenias on top, white ones, her favorite flower. She grew them in the front garden, and every spring the whole block smelled like her. The funeral director pushed a mahogany upgrade. Caroline wanted it. I said no. Grandmother despised waste. About 50 people gathered at the graveside. Neighbors from the Fan District, church friends from St. Andrew's Episcopal, a few women from the Arts Council where grandmother had volunteered for 20 years. The minister read the 23rd Psalm. I let the words wash over me without absorbing them. I wasn't listening to the prayer. I was watching the people around me. A car door slammed. Heavy, expensive, the kind of sound that costs money to engineer. Heads turned. A black Mercedes rolled to a stop on the cemetery road, brand new, showroom shine on a vehicle parked 15 feet from an open grave. Caroline stepped out. My sister. 38 years old. Blonde highlights she refreshed every 6 weeks. Designer sunglasses covering half her face even though we were standing in the shade of a 100-year-old oak. Black dress that looked like she'd had it tailored the day before. Heels that punctured the cemetery grass with each step. Carolyn moved through the world expecting it to rearrange itself around her. And it always did. Daniel Brooks climbed out after her. Her fiancé. 41. He called himself an investment consultant. I'd never pinned down what that actually meant. Charcoal suit, no tie, top button undone, a watch that caught the light every time he moved his wrist, cologne so thick I could taste it from 10 feet away. He had this smile that sat on his face like something borrowed. It never once touched his eyes. Caroline didn't hug me, didn't squeeze my arm, didn't look at me. She slipped into the space beside our father, and I watched them close ranks the way they always did, shoulder to shoulder, a unit of 2 with no room for a third. Then I saw it. A pearl pendant hanging against Caroline's black dress. Antique setting, Art Deco clasp. I recognized it the way you recognize a scar on your own hand. That necklace belonged to my grandmother. She wore it to church every single Sunday for as long as I'd been alive. She never took it off. She never lent it. She certainly never gave it away. I had seen that necklace on her neck 3 weeks earlier when I sat across from her at Sunday dinner, and she poured me sweet tea and asked about my latest project. 3 weeks ago she was wearing it. Now Caroline was, and grandmother hadn't been alive long enough to hand it over. My father stood 20 feet from the casket, positioned near the cemetery road where the cars were parked, as far from the grave as he could get while still technically attending. Richard Thompson, 63. CEO of Thompson and Locke Construction, one of Richmond's mid-tier firms. Silver-haired, tall, wearing an overcoat that cost more than my rent despite the April heat already pressing 80 degrees by mid-morning. He wasn't mourning, he was managing. I watched him shake hands with a circuit court judge, nod to a city council member. He was networking at his own mother's funeral. He acknowledged me with a nod. That was it. No embrace, no words. Then Caroline walked over and he put his arm around her shoulder and pulled her in close and whispered something I couldn't hear. She nodded. They exchanged a look I couldn't read, but felt in my stomach like a stone dropping into water. My father had 2 daughters. He picked one. He picked Caroline the way you pick a stock, strategically, eyes on the return. I was the other one, the one who looked too much like the wife who died, the one who asked too many questions, the one his mother had to raise because he couldn't be bothered to do it himself. After the service, everyone moved to grandmother's house for the reception, a colonial home on a tree-lined street in the Fan District. She'd lived there for 40 years. The church ladies filled the dining table with funeral food: ham, buttermilk biscuits, green beans cooked with bacon, potato salad, lemon pound cake, sweet tea in crystal pitchers. The smell of a Southern funeral. I walked through the front door and felt it before I saw it. I'm an architect. I read spaces the way other people read faces. I notice when furniture has been moved half an inch from where it sat for years. My eyes do it automatically. And the moment I stepped into my grandmother's house, my eyes started screaming. The filing cabinet in her study had been pulled away from the wall. Not much, an inch. But the bottom drawer wasn't flush. The desk drawers were in the wrong order. Grandmother was religious about her system. Pens in the top drawer, stationery in the second, files in the third. Always. For 40 years. Now the pens were in the second drawer. And a framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a picture of me and grandmother at my college graduation, had been moved from the left side of the clock to the right, tucked behind a vase like someone was pushing it out of sight. Someone had been in this house, in this study, searching, and whoever it was had tried to put everything back, but they didn't know grandmother's house the way I did. I sat in the living room for the next hour accepting handshakes and hugs. Margaret was a treasure. She loved you so much, sweetheart. I thanked them. I smiled. But my eyes kept pulling toward Caroline and Daniel on the far side of the room, standing near the hallway that leads to the kitchen, heads bent together, speaking so low their lips barely moved. Richard stood by the fireplace with a man I didn't recognize. Gray suit, leather briefcase, the posture of someone accustomed to billing by the hour. The man handed Richard a card. Richard pocketed it without glancing at it. A gesture that told me this wasn't an introduction, it was a continuation. Everyone in this house was performing. The neighbors performed grief. My father performed composure. And my sister performed something I couldn't name yet but could feel against my skin like a change in pressure before a storm. I needed water. I crossed toward the kitchen. The kitchen connects to the back hallway through a swinging door. I pushed it open. Voices, just around the corner, low, urgent, careful. I froze. The door hung open 3 inches, enough to hear, enough to see nothing. Caroline spoke first. Finally, the timing couldn't be more perfect. Daniel quieter. The will reading is Thursday. We need him to sign before that. Dad will handle it. He doesn't have a choice now. And Avery? A pause. When Caroline answered, her voice carried the weight of someone swatting a fly off a dinner plate. What about her? She doesn't know anything. She's an architect, not a lawyer. By the time she figures out what happened, it'll be done. Daniel's voice dropped even lower. What about the doctor? Caroline cut him off, sharp enough to draw blood. The doctor signed the death certificate. Stroke. End of story. Nobody is asking questions. I gripped the edge of that door so hard my knuckles turned the color of bone. I did not move. I did not breathe. Daniel again, barely audible. And the accounts? The 700... Not here. Caroline's voice went flat, final, like a lock clicking shut. Not now. Footsteps. The back door opened and closed. They had gone outside. I stood behind that kitchen door with a glass of water in my hand and a pulse so loud I was sure the house could hear it. Perfect timing. He needs to sign. The doctor signed. The 700. 700 what? $700? 700,000? And what did they mean the timing was perfect? My grandmother just died. What about any of this was perfect? The reception emptied slowly. Neighbors left in pairs carrying Pyrex dishes and Tupperware. Richard disappeared without a word to me. Caroline and Daniel were on the front porch, Caroline scrolling through her phone, Daniel smoking near the garden gate, his cigarette smoke curling up through the gardenia bushes like something trying to poison the air. I was the last person in the house. I stood in the living room alone. Grandmother's reading chair sat by the window with a folded quilt draped over the arm. I touched the fabric. Lavender. Her hand cream. She'd used the same brand for 30 years. The smell hit me harder than the funeral. I looked up at the photograph on the mantelpiece. The one that had been moved. Grandmother's face in that picture. Strong, warm. Her eyes sharp at 80, the kind of sharp that doesn't miss anything. And in that moment, I swear those eyes were saying something to me. Pay attention, sweetheart. You're not seeing everything yet. I picked up my bag, locked the front door with the spare key she had given me years ago, walked down the porch steps past the gardenias. Halfway to my car, my phone vibrated. Unknown number, Richmond area code. I answered. Avery Thompson? A man's voice. Measured and professional, but with something underneath. A thread pulled taut. The voice of a person choosing every word because the wrong one could cost something. My name is Dr. Robert Calloway. I was your grandmother's personal physician for 20 years. I need you to come to my office. Right now, tonight. Come alone. What is this about? Silence. I could hear him breathing. Then. There's something wrong with your grandmother's test results. Something that should have been caught weeks ago. Don't tell your sister. Don't tell your father. Don't tell anyone. Your life may depend on this. The line went dead. I stood in the driveway with the phone pressed against my ear, and the smell of gardenias rising from the dark garden behind me. My grandmother always said gardenias were the most honest flower because you could smell them before you could see them. You could not hide a gardenia. I got in my car. I drove. I drove across Richmond with both hands locked on the wheel, and Dr. Calloway's voice playing on a loop inside my skull. Don't tell your sister. Your life may depend on this. Monument Avenue slid past in a blur of streetlights and old statues. April night, warm and thick with pollen, windows down because the Honda's air conditioning had been dead for 2 summers. Honeysuckle drifted from somebody's yard. A normal Richmond spring night. Everything about it felt wrong. I'd buried my grandmother that morning. I'd watched my sister wear her necklace. I'd heard words through a kitchen door that didn't make sense yet. And now a doctor I barely knew was telling me my life depended on whatever was waiting inside his office. I drove faster. The building was a small brick box on the east side near the hospital district. The parking lot was empty. One light burned on the 2nd floor. Dr. Calloway was waiting after hours. I pushed through the door marked private and walked into a room that smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. Dr. Robert Calloway stood behind his desk, mid-60s, silver beard, reading glasses shoved up on his forehead. He'd been grandmother's physician for 20 years. I'd met him a handful of times at family gatherings. Always calm, always measured. The kind of man whose steadiness made you feel like the ground beneath you was solid. Tonight his hands were shaking. I had never in my life seen Robert Calloway's hands shake. He wasn't alone. A woman stood by the window, silhouette hard against the Venetian blinds. Tall, athletic build, dark hair pulled back tight. Gray blazer, no jewelry, a badge clipped to her belt. Early 40s, the kind of face that takes in everything and gives back nothing. Avery, sit down. Calloway gestured to the chair across from his desk. This is Detective Lauren Mitchell, Major Crimes Unit, Richmond Police. Major crimes, not missing persons, not fraud, not the department that handles paperwork and phone calls. Major crimes. Mitchell stepped forward and offered her hand. Firm grip. But her voice carried something warmer underneath, a thread of empathy that told me this woman had delivered bad news before and hadn't gone numb to it. Miss Thompson, I'm sorry about your grandmother. I'm even more sorry for what we're about to tell you. Major crimes doesn't show up for strokes. Major crimes doesn't meet you in a doctor's office at 9 on a Saturday night, the night of a funeral. Whatever was coming next was worse than anything I'd imagined standing behind that kitchen door. And I'd been imagining plenty. Calloway pushed a folder across the desk. Inside were lab printouts, charts, numbers that meant nothing to me, but one word was circled in red ink so thick the pen had nearly torn the paper. Digoxin. He explained carefully. I could tell he'd rehearsed it. Grandmother was prescribed digoxin 2 years ago for a heart arrhythmia. Standard dose, 0.125 milligrams, once daily. A common cardiac glycoside, he said. Perfectly safe at therapeutic levels. Millions of elderly Americans take it every day without a problem. The safe blood level is 0.5 to 2 nanograms per milliliter. That's the window. Anything inside it and the heart ticks along like a clock. Anything above it and the clock starts breaking. He tapped the number circled in red. Margaret's blood at the time of death, 7.9 nanograms per milliliter, nearly 4 times the upper limit. Mitchell spoke next. Her voice was flat, clinical, the voice of someone presenting facts that didn't need embellishment because the facts were already a horror show. At that concentration, digoxin doesn't regulate the heart. It destroys it, causes fatal cardiac arrhythmias that look exactly like a natural stroke. In the weeks leading up to death, you see confusion, nausea, extreme fatigue, loss of coordination. Then the heart simply gives out. It's almost undetectable unless someone orders the right blood panel afterward. Most doctors don't. Dr. Calloway did. I stared at the number. 7.9, 4 digits that rearranged the entire architecture of my grief. Someone poisoned her, I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from the other side of a wall. Slowly, Mitchell said. Over months. Small amounts added to food or drink, building up gradually. Designed to look like natural decline in an elderly woman with a known heart condition. I thought about grandmother stumbling in the hallway last January, forgetting my name in February, complaining about a metallic taste in her mouth in March. I blamed it on age, on stress, on the medication doing what medication sometimes does to 82-year-old women with bad hearts. I never once, not once, considered that someone was killing her one visit at a time. Mitchell opened a second folder. Pharmacy receipts spread across the desk like a hand of cards dealt face up. CVS on West Broad Street, Walgreens on Patterson Avenue, Rite Aid out in Henrico County. Her finger traced from receipt to receipt. 9 refills of your grandmother's digoxin prescription in 6 months. Standard protocol calls for 1 refill every 3 months. That's 3 refills per year, not 9. 3 different pharmacies, I said, already understanding. Because a single pharmacist would flag that kind of frequency, spread it across 3 stores in 3 different neighborhoods, and nobody connects the dots. Every receipt had the same name in the signature line. I read it and the room tilted sideways. Caroline Thompson, authorized representative. Your sister signed for every single one, Mitchell said. She told each pharmacy she was helping your grandmother manage her medication, a devoted granddaughter picking up prescriptions for an elderly woman with a heart condition. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? 9 prescriptions, 6 months, 3 pharmacies. My sister had turned our grandmother's own heart medication into a weapon, and she'd done it with a signature and a smile at the counter, probably making small talk about the weather while she collected the pills that would kill the woman who raised us both. Calloway reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a leather-bound journal, brown, soft, worn at the corners. I recognized it immediately. Grandmother carried that journal everywhere. She wrote in it every evening after dinner, sitting in her reading chair by the window with the green glass lamp turned low and a cup of chamomile tea on the side table. Chamomile tea. The thought hit me like a brick, and I had to grip the armrests of the chair. Margaret brought this to me 2 weeks before she died, Calloway said. His voice cracked on the last word. He cleared his throat, tried again. She was worried, not about her health, about what was happening around her. He opened the journal and turned it toward me. Grandmother's handwriting. Small, precise, elegant even at 82. The kind of penmanship they stopped teaching decades ago. January 15th. Caroline brought that chamomile blend again. Bitter aftertaste. Mentioned it to her. She said it's a new brand. Drank it anyway. Slept 14 hours. February 8th. My medication tastes different. Metallic. Like I'm chewing on a penny. Will mention to Dr. Calloway at next appointment. March 2nd. Caroline visits every Sunday now. Always brings her own tea. Sweet girl, but something feels wrong. I can't explain it. My gut says pay attention. March 26th. The handwriting shaky now. Letters uneven. The pen pressing hard enough to dent the next page. I told Elena. She says she saw something. I don't want to believe it. God help me, I don't want to believe my own granddaughter would... The sentence stopped, mid-thought, like a hand had reached across the page and closed the book. Then the final page she wrote. The handwriting barely legible, the pen gouging the paper as if the words themselves were trying to hold on. If something happens to me, find what's in the desk. Avery will know. Only Avery. I stared at those words. The desk. I didn't understand. Not fully, not yet. But something in the back of my mind was already working, an architect's instinct for hidden spaces, for the structures beneath the surface that hold everything together, for the parts of a building you can't see until you know where to look. Mitchell laid out a third set of documents: bank statements, trust fund records, transaction histories striped with yellow highlighter. Your grandmother wasn't just being poisoned, Avery, she was being robbed. Over the past 2 years, more than $700,000 had been siphoned from the Hayes Family Trust. A trust my grandmother established decades ago to protect her real estate investments, her company shares, and her grandchildren's inheritance. The money was moved through a series of wire transfers into Thompson and Locke Construction, my father's company. Your father's company has been hemorrhaging cash for 3 years, Mitchell said. No public filings, no disclosure to shareholders or partners. The firm was 6 months from insolvency when these transfers started. He stole from his own mother to save his company. He and Caroline, the transfers required dual authorization. Your sister provided the second signature on everyone. The timeline assembled itself in my head like a building going up floor by floor. Grandmother discovered the theft 8 months ago. She confronted Richard privately. He denied everything. She contacted her attorney to amend her will, splitting assets equally between both granddaughters instead of leaving the bulk to Caroline as originally planned. She announced her intention to go public at the next will reading. 3 months after that announcement, she collapsed in her home, dead of a stroke. Except it wasn't a stroke. It was 7.9 nanograms of digoxin in the blood of a woman whose own granddaughter was serving her poisoned tea every Sunday afternoon. $700,000. That's what my grandmother's life was worth to them. Less than the trust she'd built over 50 years. Less than the house she'd lived in for 40. They killed her for a fraction of what she owned, and they did it to keep a failing company alive and their own names on the door. Mitchell paused, glanced at Calloway. They shared a look I'd seen before, the look two people exchange when they're deciding who has to say the worst thing in the room. There's one more thing, Mitchell said carefully, and you need to hear it before you leave this office tonight. She pulled a court filing from her folder. Official letterhead, Richmond Circuit Court. Your father filed a petition 3 days ago requesting a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation of you. The filing claims you've been exhibiting signs of psychological instability since your grandmother's death. Paranoid ideation, delusional thinking, unfounded accusations against family members. She slid the document across the desk. I picked it up, read it, my father's signature at the bottom in his sharp, confident hand. Beside it, the attorney's name, Victor Hale, the Thompson family lawyer, the man I'd seen at the funeral, the one with the briefcase and the business card Richard pocketed without looking. Under Virginia law, Mitchell continued, If the court grants this petition and you're deemed mentally incompetent, you lose your standing as a beneficiary under the amended will. You also lose your ability to serve as a witness in any criminal proceeding. Your inheritance, your testimony, your credibility, all of it disappears. The fluorescent light above the desk buzzed in the silence. Your father isn't just covering up a crime, Avery. He's building a cage around you. And he started building it before your grandmother was even in the ground. He filed it 3 days ago, before the funeral. Before I'd said a word to anyone about my suspicions, before I heard Caroline in the hallway, before I noticed the drawers were wrong or the photograph had been moved. My father filed a petition to have me declared insane 3 days before his own mother was buried. Which meant he knew. He knew I would find out. He knew a doctor might call or a test might come back wrong or a detective might start asking questions. And he moved first. He moved before the dirt was on the casket. I sat in that office staring at my father's signature on a document designed to erase me, and I understood something I'd spent 34 years trying not to see. My father didn't just favor Caroline. He wasn't just indifferent to me. He was building a machine made of forged signatures and stolen money, and a granddaughter who brought poisoned tea to Sunday dinner. And I was the only piece that didn't fit. I looked at Mitchell. Her eyes were steady, patient. The eyes of a woman who had been waiting for someone to ask the right question. "What do I do now?" "Now," she said, "we build our own case. And we start with that desk." 2 a.m, my apartment in Church Hill, a 1-bedroom above a coffee shop that wouldn't open for another 5 hours. The street below was dead silent. I sat cross-legged on my bed with grandmother's journal open in my lap and read every page from the beginning. The leather cover was soft and warm. It felt like holding someone's hand. The pages smelled faintly of lavender, her hand cream, the same brand for 30 years. Some pages had dried flowers pressed between them. A gardenia petal from the front garden, a sprig of rosemary from the kitchen windowsill. Grandmother documented her life the way she lived it, carefully, beautifully, with attention to things most people walked right past. I read the entries spanning the last 6 months of her life. Each page was another layer of slow-motion horror. The early entries were upbeat. Garden plans, a novel she was reading, a recipe for lemon pound cake. Grandmother's voice was strong on those pages, sharp, witty, alive. The middle entries shifted. Complaints about fatigue, confusion about dates. A note that she'd called me by my mother's name. "Getting old is humiliating," she wrote. "But this feels different. This feels imposed." The late entries were devastating. Handwriting deteriorating, words misspelled, sentences abandoned. But even as her body failed, her observations grew sharper, more desperate, as if the part of her brain that recognized patterns was screaming louder to compensate for the part being poisoned into silence. Reading that journal was like watching someone drown in slow motion while everyone on the beach pretended the water was calm. I closed the journal, pressed it against my chest. The lavender scent filled my lungs and I was 12 years old again. Grandmother's kitchen. Same house, different decade. Yellow wallpaper she picked because kitchens should feel like sunshine. I was 12. My mother had been dead for 3 weeks. I hadn't eaten properly in days. I was sitting on the kitchen floor because the chairs felt too big, too adult, too permanent for a world that had just proved nothing was permanent. Grandmother found me there. She didn't scold me, didn't tell me to get up. She lowered herself down onto the tile beside me, 80-year-old knees cracking, her floral house dress spreading across the floor, and she wrapped both arms around me and held on like I was the only solid thing in the room. "You will always have me," she said. Her voice wasn't sad, it was fierce. "Your mother is gone, and that will hurt for a long time, maybe forever. But I am here, and I need you to understand something, Avery. Family is not who you're born to. Family is who protects you, remember that. It's the most important thing I'll ever teach you." I held on to those words for 22 years. They became the foundation I built everything on. Not blood, not obligation, protection, care, choice. I opened my eyes. The journal was warm against my chest. The apartment was cold. Grandmother set it on a kitchen floor when I was 12. She wrote it in a journal at 82. And somewhere between those two moments, the people who should have protected her chose money instead. 4:30 in the morning. Still dark. I was not going to sleep. The journal entry burned in my mind like a neon sign in a dark room. Find what's in the desk. Avery will know. Only Avery. I knew which desk. There was only one piece of furniture in that house my grandmother ever spoke about with reverence. The antique oak writing desk in her study, built in the 1890s by a Richmond cabinet maker. Solid quarter-sawn white oak, hand-cut dovetail joints, brass hardware green with age. She used to run her fingers along the joints and say, they built secrets into furniture back then, hidden compartments, false bottoms. A good craftsman knew some things need to be kept where only a careful eye would find them. She always looked at me when she said it, not Caroline, not Richard. Only someone who understands how things are built can find what's hidden inside them. I'm an architect. I understand structure. I understand the logic of hidden spaces, the way a panel can conceal a cavity, the way a drawer's depth won't match the desk's depth if there's something behind it. My grandmother had been speaking to me in a language only I could hear, and she'd been doing it for years. I drove to her house in the dark, parked down the block, not paranoia, instinct. Let myself in with the spare key. The hallway smelled like gardenias and old wood and dust. I used my phone flashlight instead of the lights, the beam swinging across wallpaper and the frozen face of the grandfather clock. The study door was open. I stepped inside. The filing cabinet was still pulled from the wall, same as I'd noticed at the funeral. Drawers not sitting flush. Someone had been in here searching. But the desk sat undisturbed in the center of the room, exactly where it had sat for 30 years. Whoever ransacked this study didn't know about the desk's secret. They didn't know because they weren't architects. They weren't the person grandmother built this puzzle for. I sat in her chair, ran my hands along the desk's surface, closed my eyes, felt the wood the way I feel a building's bones during a renovation. I measured the exterior dimensions against the interior drawer depths, a trick from a historic preservation course. When a desk is honest, the inside matches the outside minus the wood thickness. When they don't match, something is hiding in the difference. The numbers didn't match. The right side of the desk was 3 inches shallower inside than the external frame suggested. 3 inches, enough for a compartment. I felt along the bottom of the right-hand drawer cavity. Smooth wood. Smooth. Smooth. Then a ridge. Almost imperceptible. A seam cut so precisely it was invisible unless you were looking for it with trained fingers. I pressed. A panel shifted, slid forward on wooden runners that still glided after 130 years. Behind the panel was a cavity roughly the size of a shoebox. Inside it, 4 objects. A USB flash drive, plain black, no label. A manila envelope. Inside was a photocopy of grandmother's amended will, notarized, dated 7 months before her death. Different from any version I had ever seen. This was the real will, not whatever version Richard and Victor Hale had been planning to present at the reading. A sealed letter in grandmother's handwriting. For Avery, when the time comes. And a phone, an old flip phone, the kind you buy prepaid at a gas station for $20. I turned it on. The battery was at 12%, 1 file in the voice memo app. Recorded 3 weeks before she died. My grandmother built a dead drop. That's exactly what this was. She knew she was running out of time. She knew whoever was stealing from her was also killing her, and she hid the evidence in the one place on Earth that only I would think to look. She turned a 130-year-old desk into a message in a bottle, and she addressed it to me. I held the phone, 12% battery, 1 recording. I pressed play. Static. Then breathing. Shallow, labored, the sound of lungs that were losing a fight they didn't choose. Then her voice, weak, trembling, but unmistakably hers. That particular mix of warmth and steel that no recording could fake and no amount of digoxin could fully erase. Avery, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I tried to hold on long enough to tell you in person. I wasn't strong enough. A pause. The sound of her swallowing, gathering what she had left. Don't trust your father. He knows what's happening to me and he's chosen to protect himself. Don't trust Caroline. She visits every week and every week I get weaker. I don't have proof yet, not the kind that holds up in a court. But the financial records are on the drive. The will is real. The letter explains everything. Another pause. Longer. I could hear her crying. Quiet, controlled tears from a woman who never cried in front of anyone in her life. Find Elena. She saw things I couldn't see. She'll be frightened. They threatened her, but she's brave, braver than any of them. Her voice dropped to a whisper, fierce and broken at the same time. I love you, Avery. You were always the strong one. You just didn't know it yet. The recording ended, 11 seconds of dead air, then the phone died in my hand. I sat in the dark study holding a dead phone with tears running down my face. The room was completely still. No clock, no traffic. Just the creak of the old house settling around me like a sigh. Elena. Who was Elena? Grandmother never mentioned that name to me, not once. But she set it into a phone 3 weeks before she died like it was a detonator. Find Elena. She saw things I couldn't see. I wiped my eyes, picked up the sealed letter. Her handwriting was stronger here than in the journal. She wrote this earlier, when she was still lucid, still fighting. I didn't read every word. My eyes caught lines through the blur. I changed my will because I finally saw the truth about your father and your sister. The money they took wasn't theirs to take. The original will left everything to Caroline because Richard convinced me she needed it. He was wrong. She didn't need it. She wanted it. There's a difference. I split the inheritance equally. You deserve what I'm leaving you, not because of blood, but because you are the only one in this family who never asked me for a single thing. If they try to take what's yours, fight. Not for the money, for the truth. That's all I ever wanted, for someone to tell the truth about this family. I folded the letter, put it in my jacket pocket against my chest. I would carry it there for months. I gathered everything. USB, will, letter, the dead phone. Put them in my bag. It felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the weight. Because of what it meant. My grandmother spent her final weeks building a case she knew she wouldn't live to present. She built it the way you build a house, foundation first. And she gave me the key because she knew I was the only one who would use it right. 5:15. Dawn lightened the edges of the sky through the study windows. I walked through the house toward the front door, paused in the hallway, looked at the photograph on the mantelpiece, grandmother's face, those sharp, knowing eyes. I found it, I whispered. I found everything. I stepped onto the porch, locked the door, started walking toward my car down the block. The gardenias along the front walk were just beginning to open, their scent rising in the pre-dawn stillness. Then I saw it. A black sedan parked across the street. Lights off, engine off, but someone was inside. The faint orange glow of a cigarette behind tinted glass. That car was not there when I arrived. I kept walking, didn't speed up, didn't look twice, got into the Honda, set the bag on the passenger seat, pulled out slowly. Turned the corner onto Hanover Avenue, checked the rear view. The sedan's headlights flicked on. It swung into the lane behind me. I turned left on Grace Street. The sedan turned left. I turned right on 25th. The sedan turned right. 3 blocks, 2 car lengths back, close enough to follow, far enough to deny it. I gripped the wheel and drove with my grandmother's voice echoing in my ears, and a USB drive in my bag that felt like the most dangerous object in Richmond, Virginia. I drove straight to the Richmond Police Department the next morning. Not the front entrance. Detective Mitchell had given me instructions the night before. Side door on Franklin Street. Don't sign in. Don't talk to anyone at the desk. We don't know who's watching, she said. I handed her everything. The USB drive, the amended will, Margaret's letter, the dead prepaid phone. I kept copies of nothing. I knew originals mattered more than duplicates when a case goes to court, and I trusted Mitchell. I had to. She was the only person in law enforcement who'd looked at the evidence and believed me instead of my father's version of reality. Mitchell examined each item with the focused silence of a woman assembling a puzzle she'd been waiting to complete. The USB contained spreadsheets documenting every fraudulent transfer from the Hayes Family Trust to Thompson and Locke Construction. Dates, amounts, routing numbers. Grandmother had tracked every dollar with the precision of a woman who'd managed her own finances for 60 years and didn't trust anyone else to do it honestly. The amended will was the key. Mitchell pulled up the version Victor Hale's office had on file and set them side by side. They didn't match. Hale's version still named Caroline as primary beneficiary with broad discretionary control. Grandmother's hidden version split everything equally and included a clause I'd missed when I scanned it in the dark. If either granddaughter was found to have engaged in financial misconduct against the trust, her entire share reverted to the other. "Your grandmother built a failsafe into her own will," Mitchell said quietly. "She knew they'd try to contest it. She planned for that too." The phone went to the tech team for data recovery. The voice memo was critical evidence. Even if the phone was dead, the file could be extracted. Mitchell looked at me across the desk. "You did good, Avery. This changes the case. But there's something else you need to see before you leave." She pulled out the psychiatric petition. The same document she'd shown me the night before, but thicker now. She'd been digging overnight while I was reading Grandmother's journal and cracking open the desk. "Your father filed this through Victor Hale's office. Look at the supporting documents." I read. The petition included a signed statement from Dr. Gerald Whitfield, a psychiatrist I had never met, never seen, never spoken to in my life. His assessment claimed he'd conducted a preliminary evaluation and found concerning indicators of delusional thinking and paranoid ideation consistent with acute grief psychosis. "I've never been in a room with this man," I said. "We know. Dr. Whitfield is on retainer for Thompson and Locke Construction. He handles workers' comp psychiatric evaluations. Your father's company pays him $40,000 a year." There was a second document, a letter from Caroline Thompson to the court expressing deep concern for my sister's mental health following our grandmother's passing. The letter described me as increasingly erratic, paranoid, making unfounded accusations, and refusing to engage with family support. My sister wrote a letter to a judge calling me crazy. She put it in writing, signed it, and submitted it to a court to take away my inheritance and my ability to testify about what she did to our grandmother. My father hired a doctor I'd never met to declare me incompetent. My sister called me delusional in a legal filing. And they did it before the funeral, before I'd said a word about digoxin, pharmacy records, or poisoned tea. They weren't reacting to my accusations. They were preempting them. They'd planned this the way you plan a demolition. Set the charges first, then wait. "If the petition is granted," Mitchell said, "you lose standing under the will, credibility as a witness, and any legal ability to challenge the estate. Richard and Caroline get a clear path to everything Margaret left behind." I took a breath, held it, let it go. "Then we need Elena." Mitchell told me what she'd found. Elena Ruiz, 58 years old, originally from El Salvador, came to the United States 20 years ago, worked as grandmother's live-in housekeeper and caretaker for 12 years, devoted to Margaret. The two women were close, more like family than employer and employee. The day after Margaret died, Richard showed up at the house and fired Elena on the spot. No severance, no notice. Told her to pack her things and leave within the hour. Elena's work visa was tied to her employment with Margaret's household. "She's undocumented now?" I asked. "Her status is complicated. The visa lapsed when the employment ended. She's in legal limbo." "And they use that against her?" "We believe so. Someone, likely Daniel, told Elena that if she talked to anyone about what happened in that house, they'd report her to immigration. She disappeared the next day." Mitchell gave me a last known address in Shockoe Bottom, south of Broad Street, working-class neighborhood. Mix of renovated lofts and old walk-ups that hadn't been touched since the 70s. "I can send an officer," Mitchell said. "No, if she sees a police car, she'll run. Grandmother told me to find her. I'll find her." I drove to Shockoe Bottom, parked near the farmer's market, walked the streets asking questions at a bodega on 17th, a laundromat on Main, a Catholic church on 19th where the bulletin board had flyers in Spanish and English. I described Elena. Small, dark hair going gray, quiet voice, kind eyes. At the church, an older woman in a blue cardigan studied my face for a long time before she spoke. Why do you want to find her? Because my grandmother asked me to. Her name was Margaret Hayes. Elena worked for her for 12 years, and Elena may be the only person who can prove what happened. The woman wrote an address on a scrap of paper. 3rd floor, apartment C. She's scared, the woman said. Be gentle. The building was brick, 5 stories, no elevator, the stairwell lit by a single fluorescent tube that buzzed and flickered like it was deciding whether to give up. 3rd floor, apartment C. A thin door with a deadbolt and a chain lock visible through the gap at the frame. I knocked. Light. 3 taps. The way you knock when you don't want to startle someone who's been living in fear for weeks. Silence. Then footsteps. Slow. Cautious. A shadow crossed the peephole. Elena, my name is Avery Thompson. I'm Margaret Hayes' granddaughter. She asked me to find you. Nothing. 10 seconds, 20. Then a sound through the door. A sob, quickly swallowed. The click of a deadbolt. The slide of a chain. The door opened 3 inches. Elena Ruiz stood in the gap. Small, barely 5 feet tall. Dark hair threaded with silver. Deep lines around her mouth and eyes. She looked 10 years older than 58. Her eyes were red, not from crying just now, but from weeks of it. The kind of permanent redness that comes from grief with no outlet and no end. She looked at me for a long time, then she spoke. I know they killed her. I saw it. I saw Caroline put something in the tea, a powder, white, small. She thought I was in the laundry room, but I was in the pantry. The door was open. I saw everything. She opened the door wider. The apartment was bare, a single mattress on the floor, a hot plate on the counter, a crucifix on the wall. The apartment of someone in hiding. They told me if I talk, they call immigration. They said I'd be deported, that I'd never come back to this country. She looked at me and I saw it underneath the fear. 12 years of love for Margaret Hayes, compressed into a fury that terror alone couldn't snuff out. Come in, she said. I'll tell you everything. We sat across from each other at a small table, no tea. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Elena spoke carefully, placing each sentence like a stone in a wall she was building against the people who took Margaret from both of us. The tea. Caroline visited every Sunday for the last 6 months of Margaret's life. Always brought her own blend. Loose leaf in a sealed tin. Special chamomile from a shop in Carytown, she told Margaret. Caroline always prepared it herself, wouldn't let Elena touch the pot. One Sunday in February, Elena was in the pantry. The door was cracked open. She watched Caroline open a small plastic bag, tap a white powder into the teapot, stir it with a silver spoon, hide the bag in her purse, and carry the tray to Margaret's reading chair. That evening, Margaret vomited. Couldn't stand. Elena helped her to bed. Margaret whispered, "The tea tasted like metal again." Elena told Margaret what she saw. Margaret closed her eyes and said nothing for a very long time. Then, quietly, like a woman confirming something she already knew. I was afraid of that. Daniel's searches. He came to the house at least 4 times in the last 3 months. Always when Margaret was napping or at a doctor's appointment. He went straight to the study every time, opened drawers, pulled out files, checked the bookshelves. He was looking for something specific. Papers, financial documents. He never found them because they were hidden in a desk he didn't know how to secret. Then Elena told me the thing that changed everything. Richard's phone call, 2 weeks before Margaret died. Elena was cleaning the living room late at night. Richard was in the kitchen on his phone. He didn't know she was there. She heard him say, word for word, "Mother won't have time to change anything. It's already been arranged. By the time the will reading happens, it won't matter." Elena's voice dropped. He knew. Mr. Thompson knew his mother was dying. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't hoping. He knew because it was already arranged. I sat in that small apartment with my hands flat on the table and my heart slamming against my ribs, and I understood the full architecture of it for the first time. Caroline brought the poison. Daniel searched for the documents. Richard designed the financial escape route. Victor Hale built the legal walls. 4 people, 4 roles, 1 dead grandmother, and the only witnesses were an architect who nobody in her family respected and a housekeeper they'd threatened with deportation. I promised Elena I would protect her. I told her about Detective Mitchell. I told her the case was building. I told her grandmother trusted her enough to record her name in a voice memo as the one person who could save everything. Elena nodded. Mrs. Hayes was the kindest woman I ever knew. She didn't deserve what they did. I'll tell the police everything. I'm not afraid of them anymore. I'm afraid of what happens if I stay quiet. I left Elena's apartment and stepped onto the sidewalk. Afternoon sun, hot on my face. Shockoe Bottom was busy with people leaving work, heading to restaurants, living normal lives around a woman carrying evidence of murder in her bag. My phone vibrated. I looked at the screen. Dia D. He never calls. Not on birthdays, not on holidays, not when my mother died. He never calls. I answered. His voice was controlled, smooth, the boardroom voice, the voice that commands rooms and closes deals. But underneath the polish, there was something I'd never heard from my father before. Urgency. The sound of a man who knows the walls he built are starting to crack. Avery, we need to talk. About your grandmother, about the will, about your future. A pause, then colder, the temperature dropping 10 degrees in a single breath. Don't let your emotions destroy everything. You don't want to lose more than you already have. The line went dead. I stood on the sidewalk with the phone pressed to my ear, and my father's voice still echoing in my skull like a threat gift wrapped in concern. You don't want to lose more than you already have. I'd already lost my mother. I'd lost my grandmother. I'd lost any illusion that my father ever loved me as anything other than an inconvenience. What else was there to lose? 2 days later, I walked into my father's office because he told me to, and because I wanted to see his face when he lied to it. Mitchell had spent those days building the case, cross-referencing Elena's testimony with the pharmacy records, running the USB financials through a forensic accountant. Everything aligned, but Mitchell cautioned patience. We need them to incriminate themselves on record, she said. We need them to move. Richard's text came that morning. My office, 10 a.m., come alone. This is a family matter. I went. Not because he summoned me, because I wanted to read the building. Thompson and Locke Construction occupied the 6th floor of a glass tower on East Main Street. I hadn't been there in over a year. The lobby was the first tell. The reception desk was unmanned. The directory board still listed Thompson and Locke on the 6th floor, but 2 companies that used to share the building were gone. Their names had been scraped off the brass, leaving ghostly outlines like tombstones that someone tried to erase. The elevator opened on 6. Half the lights were off. I counted the workstations through the glass partition. 20 desks, 4 occupied. The rest were cleared, chairs pushed in, monitors dark. The ambient sound of a functioning office, phones and printers and conversations, was absent. The silence had the quality of a hospital ward, where most of the patients have been discharged, and nobody wants to admit why. I'd designed enough commercial spaces to know what a dying company looks like from the inside. The empty desks weren't temporary. The silence wasn't a slow Tuesday. Thompson and Locke was bleeding out, and my father was using my grandmother's stolen money as a tourniquet. Richard's corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows over the James River. Mahogany desk, leather chairs. The office of a man who built an image of success and refused to let it crack even as the building emptied behind him. He stood when I entered, navy suit perfectly pressed, silver hair combed back. The costume was impeccable. The company dying 20 feet from his door might as well have been in another country. Avery. He came around the desk, opened his arms. An embrace. My father hadn't hugged me in years. The gesture was so alien it made my skin pull tight, but I let it happen. Let him think his daughter came because she was scared, not because she was gathering intelligence. His cologne, sandalwood, expensive. Grandmother used to say Richard smelled like money even when he didn't have any. He guided me to the leather couch by the window, sat beside me. Close, intimate, the body language of a concerned parent. His hand settled on my knee. I wanted to remove it the way you'd remove a spider. I didn't. I'm worried about you, he said. Voice warm, eyes steady, performing warmth the way he performed everything, skillfully, without meaning it. Losing your grandmother has been devastating for all of us. But I've been hearing things. That you're not sleeping, that you've been making accusations, visiting strange neighborhoods." He paused, let the words land. "People are talking, sweetheart." People meant Caroline. Strange neighborhoods meant Shockoe Bottom. They knew I'd found Elena. Somebody was watching. Somebody had been watching since the black sedan followed me from grandmother's house. I kept my voice small, uncertain, the voice he expected. "I'm just trying to understand what happened to grandmother." "What happened is she had a stroke. She was 82 years old. It's tragic, but it's natural." His hand squeezed my knee. The squeeze was supposed to feel fatherly. It felt like a warning. "What I need you to do is take care of yourself. Caroline and I have been talking. We think it would be best if you let her manage the estate, just temporarily. Sign a simple power of attorney. Let her handle the finances, the properties. You focus on healing." He said the word healing the way a salesman says limited time offer. Something designed to create urgency where none exists. Something to rush me past the fine print. "I appreciate the concern," I said, watching his face, reading it. "But I think I need a few days to think about it." His face shifted. The smile didn't vanish. It hardened. The warmth in his eyes drained like water from a bathtub. What was left underneath was something I'd seen my entire life, but never had a name for until this moment. Contempt. Pure, structural, load-bearing contempt. It had always been there, holding up the ceiling. I just never looked up. "Avery," his voice dropped a register, "I'm trying to help you." I stood, stepped away from the couch, away from his hand, away from the window with the river view that was supposed to make me feel small. "No." "No what?" "No, I won't sign. No, I don't need a few days, no." He stood slowly, his full height, 6'2". He moved behind his desk and put the mahogany between us like a barricade, his hands flattened on the surface. The hands that built Thompson and Locke from a 3-man crew into a mid-tier Richmond firm. The hands that signed a petition to have me declared insane. "You think you know something." His voice was ice. "You think your grandmother chose you. Let me tell you what Margaret did. She pitied you. You were the sad little girl whose mother died, and Margaret couldn't stand to watch you suffer, so she overcompensated. Every birthday card, every college tuition check, every Sunday dinner. Pity, Avery. Not love, not trust. Pity." Each word landed like a fist against a wall I didn't know I was still building. "You're an architect who designs low-income housing. You drive a 10-year-old car. You live above a coffee shop. You have nothing, and you are nothing without this family's name. So sign the papers and be grateful I'm offering you a seat at this table at all." 1 second. Then it passed. Because Margaret's voice was louder. The voice from the kitchen floor when I was 12. The voice from the voice memo in the dark study. "Family is who protects you. She didn't pity me. She chose me." And the proof was hidden in a desk my father didn't even know had a secret. I left without signing, walked through the half-empty office where 4 employees kept their eyes on their screens and pretended not to hear, rode the elevator alone, crossed the dead lobby, got into my Honda in the parking garage. I sat, hands on the wheel, didn't start the engine, didn't cry. I was past crying. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage, clean, focused, architectural rage, the kind that builds structures instead of tearing them down, the kind that says, "I know exactly what's wrong with this building, and I know exactly how to fix it." I pulled out my phone and texted Mitchell. He tried to get me to sign power of attorney. He knows I found Elena. They're watching me. Her reply came 30 seconds later. "Good. Let them watch. Means they're scared. Stay the course." I drove home. For the first time since grandmother died, I wasn't grieving. I was planning. My father called me nothing. He said Margaret pitied me. He was wrong about both. He thought I would break because I'd always been the quiet one, the overlooked one, the daughter he never bothered to raise. He forgot who raised me instead. I pulled onto my street in Church Hill, parked, climbed the stairs to my apartment above the coffee shop. They were already there. Caroline stood in the hallway outside my door, leather portfolio under her arm, blonde highlights catching the overhead light, the composed expression of a woman conducting business. Daniel leaned against the wall beside her, arms crossed, that smile, the one that sat on his face like a mask over something empty. "Hey, little sister." Caroline's voice was honey poured over a blade. "We need to talk." I unlocked the door. Let them in. No recording device, no surveillance. Mitchell didn't know they were here. I was on my own, but I needed to see what they were carrying. They sat in my living room. Caroline on the couch, Daniel in the armchair. I stayed standing at the kitchen table. The apartment felt small with them in it. Their energy filled the space the way smoke fills a room, slowly and then completely. Caroline opened the portfolio, laid 3 documents on the table. A stock transfer agreement, moving my share of the Hayes Family Trust Company shares to Caroline Thompson. I scanned it with an architect's eye, the way I'd scan a blueprint for load-bearing flaws. Buried in the middle of the second page was a clause waiving my right to request a financial audit of the trust. They'd hidden it in standard language the way you'd hide a crack behind fresh drywall. A written declaration that I voluntarily relinquished any claim to contest Margaret Hayes's will. A general release of liability, waiving my right to pursue legal action against any family member regarding the estate. "It's all very standard," Caroline said. Her voice was smooth, practiced. She'd rehearsed this the way an actress rehearses a monologue. "Grandmother would have wanted us to settle this privately, as a family." I picked up each document, read them slowly, let the silence stretch, let them think I was considering it. "These are designed to strip me of everything grandmother left me." "They're designed to keep the family together," Caroline said. "You don't need the money, Avery. You have your career. I have responsibilities, the company, Dad's reputation, the trust. Let me carry that burden." Daniel leaned forward. His cologne reached me from across the room, thick and territorial. "Think of it as simplifying your life. Less stress, less complication. Everyone wins. I'll need 48 hours to have my own attorney review them." Caroline's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. A fracture in the performance. Then the mask slid back into place. 48 hours. The will reading is Thursday. She stood, smoothed her skirt, picked up the portfolio, walked to the door, professional to the last step. Daniel followed, then stopped, turned back. Caroline was already in the hallway, out of earshot. He stepped close to me, too close. His cologne was suffocating at this distance. "I want to give you some advice," he said. His voice was low, almost conversational, but his eyes were flat, dead. The eyes of a man who had learned to mimic emotion without ever feeling it. The stubborn ones always think they're being brave. They think standing their ground makes them strong. But standing your ground only works if the ground doesn't open up beneath you. He reached past me. I flinched. He picked up a pen from my kitchen counter, tapped it twice against the stack of documents. "Sign the papers, Avery. People who make things harder than they need to be tend to have very bad luck." He set the pen down, smiled, walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. I stood alone in my apartment, the documents on the table, the pen on top, silence except for the hum of the refrigerator and my pulse hammering in my ears. People who make things harder tend to have very bad luck. That wasn't a warning. That was a threat. Delivered in my own kitchen by a man who had already shown what he was willing to do to an 82-year-old woman with a heart condition and a cup of chamomile tea. I picked up my phone and called Mitchell. They were here. Caroline brought documents designed to strip everything, and Daniel threatened me, directly, in my apartment. Mitchell's voice was calm. "Good. They're desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. Don't sign anything. And Avery, we're moving faster than they think." I hung up, looked at the documents on the table. 3 pieces of paper designed to erase my grandmother's final wishes, my testimony, me. I picked up the pen Daniel had touched, walked to the trash can, dropped it in. Then I sat down at the table and started writing everything I could remember about every word he'd said, every expression Caroline wore, every detail of the document's buried clauses. An architect's notes. Precise, dated, structural. I was building my own case now, and I was building it to last. The next morning, I brought the 3 documents Caroline and Daniel had left on my kitchen table to Detective Mitchell's desk at the police station. I carried them in a folder the way you carry something radioactive. Carefully, at arm's length, aware that the contents could blow apart everything they'd built if examined by the right pair of eyes. Mitchell had company. A man named Harold Pruitt, mid-60s, retired FBI, now consulting for Virginia law enforcement on document forensics. He studied the papers with a magnifying loupe and a pencil, making notes in the margins with the quiet concentration of a surgeon examining tissue samples. His assessment took 20 minutes and dismantled everything. The stock transfer agreement contained a clause buried on page 4 in fine print. If I signed, I wouldn't just transfer my shares. I'd waive my right to audit the trust's financial history. "This isn't a transfer," Pruitt said. "It's a cover-up. Once she signs, they can destroy every financial record and she can never challenge them." The will contest waiver was backdated. The notary stamp showed a date 3 days before grandmother died. "Someone prepared this document before your grandmother's death," Pruitt said, turning the page toward Mitchell. "That means they knew or arranged that she would die." The general release was drafted by Victor Hale's office. Mitchell recognized the formatting instantly. Same letterhead, same clause structure as the psychiatric petition. Hale drafted everything: the petition, the transfer, the waiver. He's not just their lawyer, he's their architect. Their architect. The word hit differently when your entire life is about building things. Victor Hale built their conspiracy the way I built houses, with blueprints, with precision, with every exit blocked. Except he made one mistake. He assumed nobody would read the fine print. I'm an architect. Fine print is my job. Mitchell opened a separate file. Victor Hale, 61, estate attorney, 30 years in practice. He'd been the Thompson family's legal representative for 15 years, handling grandmother's original will, Richard's business contracts, Caroline's prenuptial agreement. "6 months before your grandmother died, she called our office," Mitchell said. "She wanted to file a complaint against Hale. Said he'd been sharing confidential information about her estate with Richard. She wanted him disbarred." "What happened?" Richard intercepted. Convinced Margaret that firing Hale would cause unnecessary family conflict, Margaret backed down. Mitchell paused. She always backed down when Richard pushed. But she didn't trust Hale anymore. That's why she hid the real will in the desk instead of filing it through his office. Grandmother had been fighting them for months before the poison even started. She'd been outmaneuvered at every turn. Not because she was weak. Because she loved her family too much to believe they were capable of what they were actually doing. Love was her blind spot. They used it to kill her. "Hale has been cooperating with Richard on the petition, the fraudulent documents, and the trust account access," Mitchell said. "When we move on Caroline and Daniel, we're taking Hale too." "How?" I asked. "How do we move?" Mitchell leaned back, folded her arms, and laid out the plan like a general briefing a soldier before the most important mission of her career. Location: Margaret's house in the Fan District. I would call Caroline and tell her I was ready to discuss the documents, but I wanted to do it at grandmother's house. Where it feels right. The emotional context would give Caroline a reason to come, and a reason to stay long enough to talk. More importantly, it would put them in the room where the crime happened. People get careless in familiar spaces. They forget to guard their words. Cover story. I was willing to negotiate. I wanted certain personal items from the house. Margaret's jewelry, the photographs, the reading chair. In exchange, I'd consider signing. Reasonable enough that Caroline wouldn't smell a trap. Vulnerable enough that she'd believe I was breaking. Recording. I would wear a concealed microphone, a device the size of a coat button sewn into the collar of my shirt, legal under Virginia's one-party consent law. Mitchell called it a cooperative citizen documenting a civil conversation. Surveillance. An unmarked van on Grove Avenue 2 blocks away. 2 plainclothes officers positioned near the house. Mitchell would be in the van, monitoring the audio feed in real time. Panic signal. If I felt physically threatened, I would say one phrase: "Grandmother's gardenias," The team would be through the door within 60 seconds. Mitchell looked at me across the desk. Serious, but not cold. The look of a woman who had done this before and understood what she was asking. You don't have to do this. We can build the case without a recorded confrontation. It'll take longer. The evidence is strong. But a confession on tape, especially from Daniel, makes this airtight. I didn't hesitate. I'll do it. Margaret hid evidence in her desk because she knew I'd find it. She recorded a voice memo because she knew I'd listen. This is the last thing she needed me to do. I'm finishing it. That afternoon, I drove to Shockoe Bottom, Elena's apartment. I knocked the way I'd knocked before, firmly but gently. The door opened faster this time. She'd been expecting me. I told her everything. The plan, the recording, the confrontation at Margaret's house, the arrests that would follow if it worked. Elena listened without interrupting, hands clasped in her lap. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. She looked at the crucifix on the wall, then at a small framed photograph on her windowsill that I hadn't noticed on my first visit. Elena and Margaret standing in the garden, both smiling. Elena's arm around grandmother's shoulder. Two women who chose each other as family in a world that sorted people by blood and money. Detective Mitchell has been working with immigration attorneys, I said carefully. She's trying to secure your status, legal protection. You won't be deported. Elena picked up the photograph, held it against her chest the way I'd held grandmother's journal. Mrs. Hayes saved my life when she hired me, gave me a home, treated me like a daughter. Her voice cracked but didn't break. She looked at me with eyes that held 12 years of love and 3 weeks of terror, and the kind of courage that frightened people mistake for foolishness. I will stand in any courtroom. I will say everything I saw, for her. They'll try to discredit you, I said. They'll bring up your immigration status. They'll call you disgruntled. They'll say you have a motive to lie. Let them say what they want. I know what I saw. I saw that woman put powder in her grandmother's tea and smile while she poured it. I watched Mrs. Hayes get weaker every week and I was too afraid to stop it. That fear cost your grandmother her life. I won't be afraid again. I reached across the table and held her hand. Two women in a bare apartment with a mattress on the floor and a crucifix on the wall, and a photograph of a dead woman who was braver than any of the people who killed her. Two women who loved Margaret Hayes, enough to risk everything for the truth she didn't live long enough to tell. That evening I drove to grandmother's house, not for evidence, not for strategy, just to be there. I let myself in with the spare key, didn't turn on the main lights, used the small lamp on Margaret's reading table, the one with the green glass shade that cast warm light across the room every evening for 40 years. I sat in her chair. The quilt was still draped over the arm. I pulled it into my lap. The fabric was worn soft from decades of use. It smelled like lavender and old wool and the particular warmth of a house where someone was loved. The house settled around me. Old house sounds. The tick of the grandfather clock. The creak of floorboards cooling in the evening air. Wind through the screen door Margaret always left cracked because she liked hearing the garden at night. I looked around the room. The shelf of books she'd read twice. The watercolor painting of the James River she bought at a street fair in Carytown. The reading lamp she kept angled just so, casting its green-gold light across the arm of the chair where she rested her journal every evening. Everything in this room was a sentence in the story of a woman who lived carefully and generously, and died because the people closest to her decided her life was less valuable than the money she'd earned. Tomorrow those people would sit in these chairs, they would walk on these floors, and they would hear me say everything they never wanted anyone to know. I took out the dead prepaid phone. The tech team had returned it after extracting the audio file. The phone itself was useless now, but holding it mattered. I pressed it against my chest. Tomorrow I'm going to face them in your house, grandmother. In the room where Caroline brought you tea every Sunday. In the chair where you sat when the poison made you too weak to stand. I looked at the photographs on the mantelpiece. Margaret's face, strong and warm. Those sharp eyes that missed nothing except the betrayal of the people she loved most. I'll get justice for you, not revenge. Justice. There's a difference. You taught me that. I sat in the dark for an hour. Didn't cry. Didn't plan. Just sat with the memory of a woman who deserved better than what her family gave her. And somewhere in that silence, I felt something shift inside me. The grief didn't go away. It just rearranged itself, made room for something harder, something with edges. Purpose. 9 o'clock. I picked up my phone, dialed Caroline. She answered on the second ring, eager. She'd been waiting. "Caroline, it's Avery. I've been thinking about the documents." "And?" "I'm not ready to sign, but I want to talk, in person, at grandmother's house, tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Silence, then careful. "Why grandmother's house?" "Because that's where we should have this conversation, where she lived, where she'd want us to settle things." I let my voice go soft, tired, defeated. "I just want this to be over, Caroline. I'm tired." That last line was bait. "I'm tired" is the language of surrender. Caroline heard it and believed it because she needed to believe it. People who build their lives on manipulation always underestimate the moment someone stops being afraid. "We'll be there at 10, Daniel and I." "Just you two?" "Just us." The line went dead. I exhaled. The hook was set. The next morning, 9:45. I stood in Margaret's living room wearing a navy button-down shirt with the recording device sewn into the collar, a microphone no bigger than a coat button, transmitting to the van on Grove Avenue where Mitchell was listening. 2 officers in position. Everything set. I checked myself in the hallway mirror, adjusted the collar. My reflection looked calm. My insides were not. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I counted it. 112 beats per minute. The resting heart rate of a woman about to open the door to the people who killed her grandmother. 9:55, car doors outside. I moved to the front window, peered through the lace curtain Margaret hung 30 years ago. Caroline stepped out of the black Mercedes, Daniel from the passenger side, dressed for business, Caroline in a blazer, Daniel in a dark suit. Then the rear door opened. Richard Thompson stepped out, silver hair, navy overcoat, the boardroom costume, and behind him, carrying a leather briefcase, Victor Hale. 4 of them, not 2. My phone buzzed. Mitchell's text. "We see them, 4 targets. Plan holds, stay calm, we've got you." I read the message, deleted it, put the phone in my pocket. The doorbell rang. Margaret's doorbell. The same 2-tone chime that had announced every visitor to this house for 40 years. Sunday guests, Christmas carolers, a granddaughter bringing poisoned tea. I looked at Margaret's photograph on the mantelpiece, those sharp, steady, knowing eyes. I opened the door. 4 faces looked back at me through the open door. Caroline, Daniel, Richard, Victor Hale, a wall of expensive clothing, cologne, and calculation. They filed into grandmother's living room, the room where she sat in her reading chair every evening, the room where she drank poisoned tea, the room where she wrote in her journal about the metallic taste she couldn't explain. And they walked in like they owned it. Because in their minds, they already did. I watched them take their positions. It was choreographed. They'd discussed this beforehand, assigned themselves seats the way a legal team assigns roles before a deposition. Richard took Margaret's reading chair, claiming the matriarch's seat. Caroline sat on the couch, portfolio on the coffee table. Daniel posted himself by the front window between me and the door. Victor Hale settled into the armchair nearest the hallway, briefcase on his lap. I was surrounded, every exit covered. On Grove Avenue, Mitchell was listening. 2 officers outside. But in this room, in this moment, I was alone with the 4 people who killed my grandmother. I sat in the straight-backed dining chair I'd placed for myself, deliberately uncomfortable, deliberately lower than everyone else. Let them think I was diminished. Let them believe they were winning. Victor Hale spoke first. Professional, smooth. The voice of a man billing $400 an hour. "Miss Thompson, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. We're here in the spirit of family reconciliation. Your grandmother would have wanted—" "Don't." My voice was quiet, but it stopped him. "Don't tell me what my grandmother would have wanted. You were her attorney. You were supposed to protect her interests. She tried to fire you 6 months before she died, and my father stopped her." Hale's jaw tightened. Richard's eyes narrowed. Caroline's hand froze on the portfolio clasp. The room shifted. I felt it the way you feel a building shift when you remove a load-bearing wall. One sentence, and the whole structure of their little performance started to crack. They came expecting a surrender. They got a fight. Hale recovered, opened his briefcase, laid out the documents. The same 3 from my apartment, plus a 4th. An updated power of attorney naming Richard as co-executor alongside Caroline. "This is a comprehensive estate management package," Hale said. "It protects the family's interests and ensures..." "Ensures what?" I picked up the power of attorney, read it slowly, let the silence stretch. "This gives Caroline and my father joint control over every asset in grandmother's estate, every property, every share, every dollar in the trust, and it removes my name entirely." Richard leaned forward from Margaret's chair. "Avery, this is what's best for everyone. You're not equipped to manage..." "I'm not equipped?" I looked at him. "I'm an architect. I read contracts and blueprints for a living. I know what a load-bearing clause looks like. And I know when someone's trying to demolish a structure from the inside." Caroline cut in. Voice tight, controlled, the voice of a woman holding a grenade with both hands. "This isn't about who's smarter, Avery. This is about what's practical. The will reading is in 3 days. If we don't have our affairs in order..." "Affairs?" I let the word hang in the air between us like smoke. "Is that what we're calling $700,000 stolen from grandmother's trust?" Dead silence. 4 faces, 4 different flavors of shock. I stood. Slowly. I didn't need to look small anymore. Let them see my full height, my steady eyes, my hands that weren't shaking. "I know about the digoxin." The word detonated. Caroline's face went white, not pink, not flushed, white. The blood drained from her skin so fast I watched it happen in real time. Her hand seized the arm of the couch. Daniel's jaw clenched. His body went rigid. The stillness of a man calculating whether to fight or run. Richard didn't move. A lifetime of boardroom poker faces held his expression in place, but his right hand, resting on the arm of Margaret's reading chair, tightened until the knuckles bleached. Victor Hale stood up. His briefcase hit the floor. "I know Caroline refilled grandmother's digoxin prescription 9 times in 6 months. 3 pharmacies. CVS on West Broad, Walgreens on Patterson, Rite Aid in Henrico." Each name delivered without emotion. Facts, not accusations. "I know her blood showed 7.9 nanograms per milliliter at the time of death, 4 times the safe range. I know she wrote in her journal that the tea tasted like metal." I looked at Caroline, eye to eye, sister to sister. "What was in the tea, Caroline?" "I don't know what you're..." "What was in the tea?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her mouth opened and closed, and nothing came out. For the first time in my life, I watched my sister run out of words. I turned to Richard. He was still in Margaret's chair. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of us. "And you." My voice dropped. Not anger, something colder. "Elena Ruiz heard you on the phone 2 weeks before grandmother died, word for word. Mother won't have time to change anything. It's already been arranged. By the time the will reading happens, it won't matter." Richard's composure fractured. The first real crack I'd ever seen in his armor. His mouth opened, closed. His hand left the armrest. "Who told you?" "The woman you fired the day after the funeral. The woman you threatened with deportation to keep silent. She heard everything. She saw everything. And she's ready to say it under oath." He stood. His face was dark and flushed. For the first time in my life, my father looked old. Not powerful old, just old. The kind of old that comes from building a life on lies and watching the foundation give way. "This is absurd," he said, but his voice had lost its steel. "You're making accusations based on the word of a disgruntled housekeeper. A disgruntled housekeeper who loved grandmother more than any of you ever did." Victor Hale reached for his briefcase. "I'm leaving. This meeting is over. I will not be part of..." "You're not going anywhere, Mr. Hale." My voice cut through the room like a blade through drywall. You drafted the backdated documents. You filed a fraudulent psychiatric petition against me using a doctor on my father's payroll. You conspired to strip me of my inheritance. You are part of this." Hale froze. His face went the color of wet concrete. The room was coming apart. Caroline was crying. Not the performance crying she used at the funeral, real tears. The kind that come from watching every carefully built lie crumble in real time. Richard was pacing beside the reading chair, hand on his forehead, muttering something I couldn't hear. Hale stood motionless against the wall, calculating his options the way a lawyer calculates, running numbers, weighing exits. And Daniel had been silent for too long. He stepped away from the window. His body language had changed. The smooth investor, the charming fiancé, the man with the borrowed smile and the cologne that filled rooms before he did. Gone. What was left was raw, stripped down, something feral and cornered. He moved fast, faster than I expected. 3 strides across the living room and his hand was around my throat. My back hit the wall. A framed photograph crashed to the floor beside me. I heard the glass shatter. Margaret's face on the hardwood, covered in broken glass. "You should have stayed quiet." His voice was barely human. A snarl pressed against my face, his breath hot, his fingers tightening. "You should have signed the papers and kept your mouth shut, just like the old woman. Everything was almost perfect, and you had to dig." The words, on tape, transmitted live to the surveillance van on Grove Avenue where Detective Mitchell was already giving the order. Just like the old woman. He said it. He connected himself to Margaret's death with his own voice, his own rage, his own hands wrapped around another Thompson woman's throat. I couldn't breathe. My vision narrowed to a tunnel. I clawed at his fingers. I was strong, but Daniel outweighed me by 60 pounds, and he was fueled by the kind of desperation that strips a man down to his most dangerous parts. I drove my knee upward, hard. Self-defense training from a YWCA class on Broad Street 3 years ago. Daniel gasped. His grip loosened for half a second. I sucked in air and tried to speak the panic signal. Grandmother's gardenias. But my throat was crushed, and the words wouldn't form. I didn't need them. The front door exploded inward. Not a knock, not a request. A battering ram followed by bodies in tactical gear, black uniforms, weapons drawn, voices overlapping in controlled shouts that filled the room like a thunderclap. "Police, nobody move." Hands seized Daniel, ripped him backward off me. He hit the floor face down on Margaret's hardwood, the same floor she walked on every morning for 40 years. A knee drove into his back. Handcuffs clicked shut. "Daniel Brooks, you are under arrest for assault, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit murder." Caroline screamed. Not words, just sound. She pressed herself against the couch as an officer approached. "Caroline Thompson, you are under arrest for the murder of Margaret Hayes. You have the right to remain silent." It wasn't, Daniel made me." "Anything you say can and will be used against you." Richard stood in the center of the room. He hadn't moved. His face was ashen, emptied. The CEO posture was gone. What remained was a 63-year-old man watching his world collapse in his dead mother's living room. "Richard Thompson, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, accessory after the fact, and financial fraud." His voice was barely audible. "I want my lawyer." "Your lawyer is next." Mitchell stepped through the front door, calm, steady, her badge catching the morning light. She looked at Victor Hale, who stood frozen against the hallway wall, hands raised, briefcase on the floor. "Victor Hale, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice." Hale's voice cracked. "I'll cooperate. I'll tell you everything." "You'll have that opportunity." 4 arrests. 4 sets of handcuffs. The room filled with officers and evidence technicians, and the organized chaos of justice finally arriving at an address where it was decades overdue. A paramedic checked my throat. Bruised, but intact. She pressed cold fingers against the marks Daniel left and photographed them for evidence. I sat on Margaret's couch, The same couch where grandmother dozed watching the evening news, where she folded laundry, where she held me after my mother died 22 years ago. They led Daniel out first, shouting, threats, promises of lawyers who would bury everyone. His watch caught the sunlight as they guided him into the squad car. Richard went next, silent, head down. He didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone, the man who built a company, a reputation, a family image, walking out of his mother's house in handcuffs without a single word. Victor Hale followed, cooperative, quiet, already calculating the plea deal that would save what was left of his career. Last, Caroline. 2 officers flanked her. She walked slowly through the living room, past Margaret's reading chair, past the photographs on the mantelpiece, past the ghost of every Sunday tea that was also a murder. At the door she stopped, turned, looked at me. No anger, no tears, something worse, recognition, like she was seeing her sister clearly for the first time in 34 years. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "You've never understood this family." I held her gaze, steady, the steadiest I'd ever held anything. "I understood, grandmother, that's enough." The door closed, the cars pulled away, sirens first, then silence. I stood alone in Margaret's living room, shattered glass on the floor from the broken photograph. Daniel's cologne still hanging in the air like something that refused to leave. The recording device still transmitting softly under my collar. I looked down at my hands, then at the mirror in the hallway. Bruises were already forming on my throat, purple and dark against my skin, proof that it was real, all of it. On the mantelpiece, Margaret's photograph lay face up in the broken frame. Glass scattered around it like a small explosion. But her face was untouched, those sharp, steady eyes, that knowing half-smile, the look of a woman who trusted me to finish what she started. "I did it, grandmother, I finished it." The gardenias outside the front window were in full bloom. I could smell them through the cracked screen door. "Honest flowers," she always said. "You can't hide a gardenia." You couldn't hide the truth either. Not forever. Not from someone who knew where to look. VCU Medical Center. Emergency room. I sat on a hospital bed behind a thin blue curtain while a nurse photographed my throat. Deep purple bruises spread across both sides of my neck where Daniel's fingers had dug in. Swelling along the trachea, burst capillaries in both eyes from the pressure. I looked like someone had tried to strangle me, because someone had. A doctor checked my airway, told me to speak. My voice came out raw, scraped, 2 octaves lower than normal, like someone had dragged gravel across my vocal cords. "You're going to sound like this for a week or 2, she said. "Nothing's fractured, but the soft tissue damage is significant. Anti-inflammatories and a follow-up with ENT. I touched my throat, felt the heat of the bruises under my fingertips. 6 hours ago, these bruises were Daniel's hands. Now they were evidence. Photographed, measured, documented in a medical file that would be entered into court records and projected on a screen in front of a jury. Detective Mitchell arrived as the nurse finished. She carried 2 things, a cup of black coffee and a folder thick enough to tell me the investigation had moved fast in the hours since the arrests. She sat on the plastic chair beside the bed, handed me the coffee. No sugar, the kind of offering that says, "This is going to hurt, drink first." 4 arrests, 4 separate holding cells, 4 different lawyers already requesting meetings. She opened the folder. "And 3 pieces of new information you need to hear before the press gets hold of them." I wrapped both hands around the cup. The warmth helped. Everything else was about to get colder. When we executed the search warrant on Daniel Brooks's apartment in Short Pump, we found a second phone, Mitchell said. Burner, prepaid. Same model your grandmother used to record the voice memo, which is its own kind of irony. The phone contained text messages spanning 14 months, all to one person, Kristen Webb, 29 years old, paralegal at a law firm in Arlington, 2 hours north of Richmond. Mitchell read the messages, not verbatim, but close enough to feel every word like a blade. Daniel to Kristen, 11 months ago. "The old woman's trust is worth millions. Once Caroline and I are married and the estate transfers, I'll have everything I need. 6 months, maybe less. Then I'm done here." Daniel to Kristen, 7 months ago. Caroline doesn't suspect anything. She thinks this is about us building a life together. She has no idea I'm building one with you. Daniel DeChristin, 3 months ago. The grandmother is getting weaker. It's working. By summer, I'll have the accounts transferred and we can start fresh. Mitchell turned the phone screen toward me. A photograph. Daniel and Kristen at a restaurant. Candles, wine. His arm around her shoulders. He was smiling. The same smile he wore at Margaret's funeral. The same smile he wore when he slid documents across my kitchen table. The same smile that never reached his eyes because there was nothing behind it to reach. He was going to take the money and leave Caroline, Mitchell said. He was using her. She poisoned her own grandmother for a man who was planning to abandon her the moment the checks cleared. My sister killed the woman who raised us for a man who never loved her. She destroyed our family for a fairy tale written by someone else, and in that fairy tale, Caroline was never the princess. She was the pawn. The cruelty of it didn't feel like irony. It felt like a second murder. Margaret was killed for money. Caroline was killed for love she thought was real but never existed. 2 women destroyed by the same man, and only one of them knew it. Mitchell turned to the second piece of information. Richard Thompson is talking, not confessing. He's too smart for that. But in the process of denying everything, he's contradicting himself on the record. Richard's story to his lawyer. He knew nothing about the poisoning. He only learned about the digoxin after Margaret's death. He simply helped Caroline manage the estate, and any financial irregularities were accounting errors. But the evidence from Daniel's apartment, Elena's testimony, and Victor Hale's cooperation told a different story entirely. Richard provided Caroline with Margaret's complete medical history, including the digoxin prescription. He obtained it by calling Dr. Calloway's office and impersonating a family care coordinator. Richard introduced Daniel to an offshore banking contact in the Cayman Islands. Wire transfer records showed Richard authorized the opening of the shell account where trust funds were funneled. Richard personally instructed Victor Hale on how to draft the backdated documents, the fraudulent power of attorney, and the psychiatric petition against me. In one email recovered from Hale's server, Richard wrote, "Mother won't live long enough to contest anything. Prepare the paperwork now." He didn't hold the poison, Mitchell said. But he built the machine. He designed the financial escape route, silenced the witnesses, and tried to destroy your credibility before you could speak. Your father was the architect of the entire conspiracy. The architect. There was that word again. My father built things his whole life, buildings, companies, reputations. And when his empire started crumbling, he built one last structure. A conspiracy designed to murder his own mother, rob his youngest daughter, and walk away clean. He was good at building things, just not the things that mattered. Mitchell delivered the third piece of information. The good news. The psychiatric evaluation petition has been dismissed. The judge threw it out this morning. Once Mitchell's team submitted evidence of Richard's conspiracy, including Victor Hale's cooperation agreement confirming the petition was fabricated as a legal weapon, the Richmond Circuit Court had no choice. The judge issued a 1-paragraph ruling. The petition filed by Richard Thompson was predicated on fraud and is hereby dismissed with prejudice. The petitioner is referred for potential contempt of court proceedings. With prejudice, meaning it could never be refiled. Richard's last legal weapon against me was gone. The cage he tried to build around my mind had collapsed before the door ever closed. "Your inheritance is secure," Mitchell said. "The amended will, the one Margaret hid in the desk, has been authenticated as the valid document. Hale's version has been flagged as fraudulent. You're the rightful co-beneficiary of the Hayes Family Trust." I nodded. I should have felt victorious. I felt hollow. The money was never the point. Margaret was the point. And Margaret was still dead. No petition dismissal, no authenticated will, no amount of legal vindication could change the fact that my grandmother died alone in a house full of people who were supposed to love her, poisoned by her own granddaughter, betrayed by her own son, and abandoned by the attorney sworn to protect her interests. Justice doesn't resurrect anyone. It just makes the silence a little less unbearable. By evening, the story was everywhere. The Richmond Times-Dispatch ran it front page. Prominent builder and family arrested in grandmother's murder. Local TV stations led their 6 o'clock broadcasts with footage of the arrests. Daniel being loaded into a cruiser. Caroline's face behind the glass. Richard's silver hair disappearing through the precinct doors. My name was public. My apartment address was findable. By 7 that evening, a news van was parked on my street in Church Hill. A reporter knocked on my door, then another, then a freelance blogger who'd somehow gotten my cell phone number. I couldn't stay there. I packed a bag, drove to Margaret's house, let myself in with the spare key, a gesture that had become ritual by now. Repetition, prayer. The house wrapped around me like an old coat. The gardenias in the front garden were wilting. Nobody had watered them since Margaret died. The kitchen smelled like dust, and the ghost of lemon pound cake, and the faint, persistent trace of lavender that seemed to live inside the walls themselves. The living room had been cleaned since the arrests. The broken picture frame was gone. The shattered glass swept up. But I could still see the outline on the wall where the photograph had hung, a faded rectangle of wallpaper that marked the absence of Margaret's face. Someone from Mitchell's team had taken the recording equipment. The straight-backed dining chair I'd sat in during the confrontation was pushed against the wall. The couch cushions still held the impression of Caroline's weight. I walked upstairs to Margaret's bedroom, a room I hadn't entered since childhood sleepovers when I was 10, and Margaret let me stay up past midnight reading fairy tales under the covers with a flashlight. The bed was made with her precise hospital corners, the quilt folded at the foot, the lavender sachet on the nightstand. Everything exactly as she left it, as if she expected to come home. I lay on the bed, pulled the quilt over my body. The pillow smelled like lavender hand cream and old paper. Margaret's scent, the one smell that had meant safe for 22 years. I held her journal against my chest the way Elena held that photograph. 2 women in 2 different rooms, both clutching the last physical evidence that Margaret Hayes existed and was loved. I got them, grandmother, all 4 of them. It's not enough. Nothing will ever be enough. But it's what you asked me to do, and I did it. I slept for the first time in days. No dreams, no nightmares, just silence and lavender, and the old house sounds of a building that had sheltered Margaret for 40 years, and was now sheltering me. The next morning. Sunlight through Margaret's bedroom curtains, the same lace I'd peered through to see 4 enemies step out of a black Mercedes. A knock at the front door. Not a reporter. A woman in a navy suit, early 50s, silver reading glasses, carrying a leather portfolio. She introduced herself as Patricia Langley, estate attorney, appointed to replace Victor Hale in administering Margaret's estate. "I've been reviewing your grandmother's amended will," Patricia said, sitting at Margaret's kitchen table. The same table where Elena and I sat, the same table where Margaret ate breakfast every morning for decades. "Everything is in order. The trust, the properties, the company shares. They'll be distributed according to Margaret's wishes once probate is complete." She paused, opened the portfolio, pulled out a single document, a sealed addendum clipped to the back of the will. However, there's one clause Margaret designated as conditional. She specified it should only be activated and only be read after any criminal investigation into her death was resolved. She slid the document across the table. A sealed envelope. Margaret's handwriting on the front, steady and precise even in the weeks before she died. To be opened when the truth is known. "The investigation has resulted in 4 arrests and formal charges," Patricia said. "The condition has been met. This clause is now active." I held the envelope, didn't open it. Not yet. The weight of it in my hands felt like holding one of Margaret's letters from childhood, the ones she sent me every birthday with a pressed gardenia petal inside. "What kind of clause is this?" Patricia shook her head. "I don't know. Margaret sealed it personally. She told me and only me that it contained her final wishes for the house. She said you would understand when the time came." I looked down at the envelope. Margaret's handwriting, the same hand that wrote in her journal every night, that signed the amended will, that held mine on the kitchen floor when I was 12 and the world was ending for the first time. Still one step ahead, still building something I couldn't see yet, still choosing me from a place I couldn't reach. I set the envelope on the kitchen table next to the lavender sachet I'd brought down from the nightstand. 2 objects from a dead woman who somehow still had more to say. Whatever was inside would have to wait. The truth was known, but it wasn't finished. There was still a trial. There were still 3 people who would stand before a jury and try to explain why an 82-year-old woman with a heart condition and a cup of chamomile tea had to die so they could keep the money she earned. The envelope could wait. Grandmother had been patient her entire life. The least I could do was honor that. 6 months after the arrests, I stopped getting out of bed. I thought catching them would fix it. I thought justice would feel like healing. It didn't. It felt like standing in a house where everyone I loved had either died or been arrested, and the silence was so loud it had a heartbeat. Margaret's house reflected what was happening inside me. The garden was dead. The gardenias she tended for decades had turned brown and brittle, their stems snapping when the wind pushed through them. The front porch where she sat every evening watching the sunset over the Fan District was covered in unswept leaves. Inside was worse. Dishes in the sink, curtains drawn at noon, her reading lamp dark. I hadn't turned it on since I moved in. The green glass shade sat cold and dusty like the eye of something that had stopped seeing. I hadn't been to work in 3 months. My firm put me on indefinite leave. Compassionate, they called it. I called it exile. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't hold a pencil steady enough to draw a clean line, couldn't sit in a conference room without feeling Daniel's hands tighten around my throat. Every closed door was a trap. Every man's cologne was a warning. The nightmares came every night. The same loop, Daniel's face above me, his fingers closing. Margaret's voice on the voice memo playing on repeat, fragile and fierce, getting weaker with each cycle until it was just a whisper and then nothing. Some nights, the nightmare changed. Caroline pouring tea into a cup, Margaret's cup, then my cup, the tea turning the color of rust. I'd lost weight. My eyes were hollow. I hadn't answered my phone in 2 weeks. Margaret's garden was dying because I was dying. The house that was once full of life, lavender and gardenias and lemon pound cake and the tick of the grandfather clock, was becoming a mausoleum. And I was becoming its ghost. A Saturday morning. I was on the couch in the living room staring at the ceiling. I hadn't showered in 3 days. Margaret's journal was on the coffee table, closed. I couldn't open it anymore. Every page was a wound I'd already memorized. Someone knocked. Not the quiet knock of a reporter or the official knock of a detective. 3 sharp raps, impatient, familiar, refusing to be ignored. Avery Thompson, if you don't open this door in 10 seconds, I'm using the key under the flower pot. Margaret told me about it 3 years ago, and I've been sitting on that information like a responsible adult until right now. Nora Chen, 36, fellow architect at the firm. My only real friend outside of Margaret. The one person who always told me the truth even when the truth had sharp edges. Chinese-American, second generation, grew up in Fairfax. 5'4", wire-rimmed glasses, the energy of someone who treats every problem like a design challenge and refuses to believe any structure is beyond repair. I opened the door. Nora looked at me, took in the unwashed hair, the hollow cheeks, the t-shirt I'd been wearing for 3 days. She didn't flinch, didn't pity, didn't lecture. She walked past me into the kitchen, set 2 bags of groceries on the counter, and started cooking. "I'm making congee," she said. "My mom's recipe. You're going to eat it, then you're going to shower, then you're going to tell me everything. In that order." This is what Nora does. She builds things, food, structures, friendships. She approaches everything the same way, materials, plan, execution. I hadn't eaten a real meal in days. The smell of ginger and chicken broth filled the kitchen, and for the first time in weeks, Margaret's house smelled alive. We sat at Margaret's kitchen table. I ate, then I talked. For 2 hours I told Nora everything. The digoxin, the pharmacy records, Elena in the apartment with the crucifix and the mattress on the floor. Richard's petition. Daniel's hands on my throat. The sealed will clause sitting in a drawer upstairs, still unopened. Nora listened without interrupting, the way a good architect listens to a client describe a building they can't quite see yet. When I finished, she set down her spoon. "You did the hardest thing anyone in your family has ever done. You told the truth. Now you need to survive telling it one more time in court." Nora insisted I see a therapist, made the appointment herself, drove me there. Dr. Gabrielle Santos, trauma specialist, mid-50s. Her office was in a converted Victorian on Floyd Avenue. Warm colors, plants in every corner, a couch that felt like it had absorbed 1,000 confessions and never judged a single one. She had the calm authority of a woman who'd walked through other people's darkness for 30 years and still believed in light. The first session, I sat on the couch, couldn't look her in the eye. "I don't know why I'm here. My grandmother was murdered. My sister did it. My father helped. My sister's fiancé tried to kill me. I got them arrested. The trial starts in a month. I should feel strong. I feel like I'm disappearing." Dr. Santos didn't rush to fix it. She sat, let the silence breathe. Then with a voice that carried no judgment and no hurry. "You've lost 3 people in your family. Not all to death, but all to betrayal. Your mother died when you were 12. Your grandmother was murdered. Your father and sister chose money over love. That's 4 losses stacked on top of each other, and you've been carrying all of them alone. I had Margaret. And now Margaret is gone. So the question isn't, why do I feel like I'm disappearing? The question is, who told me I was enough? And the answer is, Margaret. She told you. She chose you. She hid evidence in a desk only you could open. She recorded a voice memo addressed to you. She amended her will to protect you. In a family full of people who chose themselves, Margaret chose you." A pause, my eyes filled, I didn't wipe them. "You're not disappearing, Avery. You're grieving. And grief doesn't mean weakness. It means you loved someone who deserved it." Dr. Santos gave me back a word I'd lost: chosen. Margaret didn't pity me. That was my father's word, his weapon, the lie he deployed in his corner office to strip me of every good memory. Margaret chose me. There's a difference so large you could build a house inside it. 3 weeks before the trial, I met the prosecutor, Rachel Nguyen, Vietnamese American, early 40s, sharp jaw, sharper eyes. She wore minimal makeup and maximum preparation. Her briefcase was organized with the same obsessive precision Margaret applied to her desk drawers. She'd prosecuted 6 homicide cases in Richmond. Won 5. The one she lost still bothered her, a case where the jury sympathized with the defendant's tears instead of the evidence. She swore it wouldn't happen again. Trial strategy session, Rachel's office, a whiteboard covered in timelines, witness lists, evidence chains. "Here's what the defense will do," Rachel said, tapping the board with a marker. "Daniel's lawyer will claim Caroline coerced him, that she was the mastermind and he was the obedient fiancé. He'll paint Daniel as a victim of love. Daniel strangled me and confessed on tape. He'll claim emotional distress, temporary loss of control. His lawyer is good. Caroline's defense will go the opposite direction. She'll claim Daniel and Richard manipulated her, that she was the abused partner following orders. She'll cry on the stand. She'll look at the jury with those blue eyes and say she loved her grandmother and never meant to hurt anyone." "Did she love her?" Rachel paused. Considered the question the way a prosecutor considers every question, not for its emotional weight but for its courtroom impact. "The jury won't care whether she did. They'll care whether they believe she did. And Caroline is a very convincing performer." "What about Richard?" "Richard will deny everything. His lawyer will argue the financial transfers were legitimate business transactions, that he had no knowledge of the poisoning, that Victor Hale acted independently, and Richard was an innocent client relying on professional counsel." Rachel set down the marker. Looked at me. "Your job is simple but not easy. Tell the truth. Don't embellish. Don't perform. When they try to break you on cross-examination, and they will, you come back to the facts. The digoxin, the pharmacy records, the voice memo, the journal, the recording from the wire. The facts are your foundation. Build on them the way you'd build a house, solid, square, load-bearing." I nodded. She was speaking my language. She knew it. 2 weeks before the trial, my phone rang. Elena Ruiz. Avery. Her voice was steadier than the last time we spoke, stronger. 6 months of hiding had tempered something inside her into steel. I wanted to call you myself. Not the detective, not the lawyer, you. What is it? I'm ready for the trial. I'll say everything. What I saw Caroline do with the tea, what I heard your father say on the phone, all of it, every word. Elena, they'll try to discredit you. The defense will bring up your immigration status. They'll say you're testifying for a deal, that your testimony was bought. Let them say what they want. Mrs. Hayes gave me 12 years of dignity. She treated me like family when my own family was an ocean away. She deserved better than what they did to her. I owe her the truth. A pause. And the truth doesn't have an expiration date. Elena had spent 6 months in a small apartment, hiding from a threat that turned out to be a bluff. She'd lost her home, her employer, her sense of safety, and she was ready to walk into a courtroom and face the people who'd tried to silence her. Margaret chose well when she told me to find Elena. Elena Ruiz was the bravest person in this entire story. She'd just been invisible the whole time. The week before the trial, I stepped onto Margaret's front porch. The dead gardenias stared back at me, brown stems, dry soil, petals scattered on the walkway like confetti at a funeral nobody wanted to attend. I walked to the garden shed, found Margaret's tools. Pruning shears, trowel, watering can, a pair of gardening gloves worn soft at the fingertips from decades of use. I put on the gloves. Her hands were smaller, but the fabric stretched to fit. The leather still smelled like her. Soil and lavender and the particular warmth of a woman who believed that anything could grow if you gave it enough patience. I spent the afternoon clearing the dead growth, turning the soil, watering. I couldn't bring the gardenias back. They were gone. But I planted new ones. 3 bushes. White blooms that wouldn't flower until summer. An act of faith in a future I couldn't yet see but was choosing to build anyway. Nora stopped by, saw me in the garden, dirt on my knees, sweat on my forehead, Margaret's gloves on my hands. You're gardening. I'm rebuilding. She smiled, sat on the porch steps, watched me work, didn't say another word. She didn't need to. Some things you rebuild with your hands, not your mouth. The night before the trial. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in Margaret's bedroom. I was wearing the black dress I bought for the funeral, the one from the consignment shop on Carey Street. The same dress I wore the day I first noticed Caroline's necklace, the ransacked study, the whispered conversation about things that weren't supposed to be heard. I buttoned the collar, adjusted the sleeves, looked at myself. My eyes were clear. The hollows in my cheeks had filled slightly. Nora's cooking, Dr. Santos's quiet questions, the garden's fresh air. I wasn't healed. I wouldn't be healed for a long time, maybe not ever completely. But I was standing. And standing was enough. I touched the fading scar on my throat, the last visible trace of Daniel's hands. Pale now, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. I would always know where to look. Some scars aren't reminders of weakness. They're proof you survived someone who thought they could silence you. Tomorrow morning I was going to walk into a courtroom and tell a room full of strangers how my sister murdered my grandmother with chamomile tea and crushed heart medication. I was going to look Caroline in the eye and say words that would put her in prison for decades. And I was going to do it wearing the same dress I wore to grandmother's funeral, because this wasn't a second burial. This was a resurrection. I turned off the bedroom light. Margaret's lavender scent wrapped around me in the dark. The grandfather clock ticked downstairs, steady and patient, the way it had ticked every night of Margaret's life in this house. I'm not burying you again, grandmother. Tomorrow, I bury the silence. Richmond Circuit Court. A Monday morning in October, 6 months and 3 weeks after Margaret Hayes was buried in Hollywood Cemetery. I read the courthouse the way I read every building. Neoclassical facade. Limestone columns stained gray by a century of weather. Bronze doors heavy enough to require both hands. Inside, marble floors amplified every footstep into something ceremonial. This building was designed to make people feel small. Today it was the largest room I'd ever entered. Every seat was taken. Local media in the front row. Reporters, 2 TV crews, a podcaster covering Virginia true crime. Behind them sat neighbors from the Fan District, church friends from St. Andrew's Episcopal, former employees from Thompson and Locke who'd lost their jobs when the company collapsed. Elena Ruiz sat in the 3rd row. Nora Chen beside her. 2 women who had never met before this case, sitting shoulder to shoulder in the kind of solidarity that doesn't need introduction. 3 defendants at the defense table. Daniel Brooks, Caroline Thompson, Richard Thompson. 3 separate defense attorneys. 3 different strategies designed to point blame at anyone other than their own client. Victor Hale sat at the prosecution's table, cooperating witness. His plea deal signed, his legal career finished. Daniel had lost weight. Jail had stripped the polish the way sandpaper strips lacquer. No charcoal suit, no expensive watch. Orange jumpsuit, shackled ankles, wrists resting flat on the table. The smile was gone. Whatever had lived behind it was gone too. Caroline was thin. Her hair had grayed at the temples in 6 months, a startling change that made her look a decade older. She wore a simple dress, no designer label, no pearl necklace. Margaret's necklace, the one she'd worn to the funeral, had been seized as evidence. Without it, her neck looked bare and exposed, like a wall stripped of its last painting. Richard sat rigid, silver hair still combed. He was the only defendant not in a jumpsuit, out on bail with an ankle monitor wearing his Navy suit. Still performing, still the CEO of a company that no longer existed. The prosecution calls Avery Thompson. 60 feet from the gallery to the witness stand. The longest walk of my life. I could feel every eye in the room. I could hear the scratch of reporters' pens, the quiet click of a camera shutter, the hum of the fluorescent lights above the judge's bench. I sat, adjusted the microphone, looked at Rachel Nguyen, who gave me one small nod. Rachel walked me through the story. Margaret's death, the funeral, the doctor's call, the digoxin, 7.9 nanograms per milliliter, the pharmacy records, the journal, the desk with the hidden compartment, the voice memo, the $700,000 siphoned from the trust, Elena's eyewitness account, the confrontation, Daniel's hands around my throat, his words on the wire. You should have stayed quiet, just like the old woman. I delivered the facts the way Rachel coached me, steady, specific, no embellishment. Cross-examination. Daniel's attorney was a sharp-suited defense lawyer named Marcus Webb. He probed for cracks the way a building inspector probes for structural failure, pressing every joint, testing every connection. Isn't it true you had a contentious relationship with your sister long before your grandmother's death? I had an honest one. There's a difference. You went to the police with suspicions before any formal evidence existed. Isn't it possible you were seeking revenge against a family that excluded you? I went to the police because a doctor told me my grandmother's blood contained 4 times the safe level of a heart medication she'd been prescribed for years. That's not revenge. That's arithmetic. A murmur moved through the gallery. Rachel suppressed a smile. The defense tried to rattle me, tried to paint me as bitter, paranoid, delusional, the same portrait Richard had tried to build with his psychiatric petition. But the petition had been dismissed with prejudice, and the word delusional doesn't land the same way when the woman saying it has bruises on her throat documented in a medical file, and a grandmother's voice on a recording saying, "Don't trust your father." I held. I held because of Margaret. Because of Elena, because of Nora and Dr. Santos. Because the truth doesn't need performance. It just needs a steady voice and a woman willing to use it. The prosecution calls Elena Ruiz. Elena walked to the stand in a simple blue dress I'd helped her pick out. Her hands were clasped in front of her. She was trembling, but her chin was up. The courtroom saw a small woman, a housekeeper, an immigrant. The defense had already positioned her as unreliable, a witness testifying in exchange for immigration benefits. Elena dismantled that narrative in 5 minutes. She spoke slowly, precisely, in accented English that carried 12 years of devotion to a woman she loved like a mother. Every Sunday, Miss Caroline brought a tin of loose-leaf chamomile. She prepared it herself. Never let me touch it. One Sunday in February, I was in the pantry. The door was open 3 inches. I saw her open a small plastic bag. She tapped a white powder into the teapot, stirred it with a silver spoon. Then she hid the bag in her purse and carried the tray to Mrs. Hayes. That evening, Mrs. Hayes was sick, vomiting, confused. She said the tea tasted like pennies. I helped her to bed. I told her what I saw. She closed her eyes for a very long time. Then she said, "I was afraid of that." She cried that night. I heard her through the wall. 2 weeks before Mrs. Hayes died, I was cleaning the living room late at night. Mr. Thompson was in the kitchen on the phone. He said, Elena paused, swallowed, steadied herself. He said, "Mother won't have time to change anything. It's already been arranged." Caroline's attorney objected. Hearsay. The judge overruled. Elena was testifying to what she directly heard, not what was reported to her. Elena looked at the jury. 12 faces, 12 strangers who had never met Margaret Hayes and were now carrying the weight of her death. Mrs. Hayes saved my life. She gave me a home and treated me like her own daughter. I promised her I would tell the truth. I'm keeping that promise. Dr. Robert Calloway took the stand next. 20 years as Margaret's physician. His testimony was clinical, authoritative, and quietly devastating. He explained digoxin, a cardiac glycoside derived from the foxglove plant. At therapeutic doses, it regulates heart rhythm. At toxic levels, it triggers fatal arrhythmias indistinguishable from natural cardiac events. The perfect poison for an elderly patient with a known heart condition, he said. The symptoms of poisoning, fatigue, confusion, nausea, visual disturbances mirror the symptoms of aging. No one questions it until it's too late. Margaret's blood level at death, 7.9 nanograms per milliliter, nearly 4 times the upper therapeutic limit. This concentration is not achievable through prescribed dosing. Someone was supplementing her intake, consistently, over months. Rachel entered the physical evidence, Margaret's journal. She read 3 entries aloud, and the courtroom went silent in the particular way a room goes silent when a dead woman's words are more alive than anyone breathing in it. The pharmacy records, 9 refills, 3 pharmacies, Caroline's signature. Each receipt projected on a screen beside the witness stand. The voice memo. Rachel played it through the courtroom speakers. Margaret's voice, weak and trembling and fierce, filled the room the way a hymn fills a cathedral. Don't trust your father. Don't trust Caroline. She visits every week, and every week I get weaker. Find Elena. I love you, Avery. You were always the strong one. You just didn't know it yet. Several jurors looked away. A woman in the gallery pressed her hand over her mouth. Elena, in the 3rd row, bowed her head and wept silently. Nora put her arm around Elena's shoulders. The confrontation recording. Daniel's voice, captured through the microphone sewn into my collar. You should have stayed quiet, just like the old woman. Everything was almost perfect. The recording ended. The courtroom sat in 4 seconds of absolute silence before the judge called for recess. After the break, Rachel called her final witness, Victor Hale. Hale took the stand in a gray suit, no tie, diminished. A man who spent 30 years building a legal career and was now taking it apart 1 sentence at a time to save himself from a cell. His plea deal, full cooperation in exchange for a suspended sentence and disbarment. He would never practice law again. But he wouldn't go to prison. Rachel walked him through it. Did you draft the backdated power of attorney documents? Yes. At whose direction? Richard Thompson's. Did you file the psychiatric evaluation petition against Avery Thompson? Yes, Richard instructed me to. He said, and I'm quoting, "We need her declared incompetent before she starts asking questions." A murmur. Richard's attorney objected, overruled. Were you aware of the financial transfers from the Hayes Family Trust to Thompson and Locke Construction? I facilitated them. I created the shell account structure Richard used to move the funds. He provided the account numbers. I prepared the paperwork. Did Richard Thompson know that Margaret Hayes was being poisoned? Hale paused, looked down at his hands, then looked directly at Richard across the courtroom, the way a man looks at someone he's about to destroy. Yes, he knew. He told me, 3 months before Margaret died, "Mother won't live long enough to contest anything. Prepare the paperwork now." Those were his exact words. I wrote them down because I knew even then that someday someone would ask. Richard's attorney erupted. "Objection! This is hearsay and manufactured testimony from a cooperating witness who—" "Overruled." The judge's voice was a blade. Richard stared at Hale across the courtroom. The look of a man who hired a builder and watched him set the building on fire. Richard's defense attorney, a white-haired veteran named Caldwell Price, attempted damage control. Put Richard's denial on the record. His client had no knowledge of the poisoning. The financial transfers were legitimate business transactions. Hale was lying to reduce his own sentence. But the evidence was a wall. Emails from Hale's server in Richard's own words. The offshore account opened with Richard's authorization. The psychiatric petition designed to silence his youngest daughter before she could speak. Wall after wall after wall. And Caldwell Price had nothing left but a man in a Navy suit insisting the walls weren't his. I watched my father from the gallery. For a moment I saw him as he used to be. Tall, silver-haired, commanding. The man who shook hands with judges at his own mother's funeral. Now he sat at a defense table while his mother's voice echoed from a dead woman's phone recording, and the walls he'd spent a lifetime building were collapsing around him in front of cameras and reporters and 12 strangers who would decide his fate. I felt nothing, not anger, not pity, not satisfaction, just the cold recognition that the man who called me nothing had become nothing himself. The judge called for end of proceedings. Tomorrow, closing arguments, victim impact statements, jury deliberation. As the bailiff prepared to escort the defendants, Caroline's attorney rose. "Your Honor, my client requests permission to address the court before closing arguments. She wishes to make a statement." The judge considered. Looked at Caroline. She'd been silent the entire trial. No outbursts. No tears on the stand. She hadn't testified. Her attorney had built a defense on blaming Daniel and Richard without ever putting Caroline herself in front of the jury. "The court will hear Miss Thompson's statement tomorrow morning." The courtroom stirred. Rachel glanced at me with a look that said, "We didn't expect this." I stared at my sister. Caroline was looking back at me, not with hatred, not with contempt, with something I hadn't seen on her face since we were children sharing a bed during thunderstorms. Exhaustion. And underneath it, something that might have been the first honest emotion she'd shown in years. "I want to tell the truth," she said, quietly, not to the judge, not to her lawyer. "To me." The bailiff took her arm. She stood, walked toward the side door. The courtroom emptied. I sat in my seat and listened to the marble walls hold the echo of Margaret's voice memo the way a cathedral holds a hymn long after the choir has left. Tomorrow my sister would speak, and I had no idea what she was going to say. Tuesday morning. The courtroom was more crowded than the day before. Word had spread that Caroline Thompson intended to speak. Standing room only. The judge warned the gallery at the start. Silence will be maintained, or the room will be cleared. Caroline rose from the defense table. Her attorney placed a hand on her arm, a last attempt to stop what he knew was about to end his case. She shook him off. She walked to the front of the courtroom, didn't go to the witness stand, stood in the open space between the defense table and the judge's bench, a no-man's land where the choreography of law gives way to something more primal. She was barely recognizable. 6 months in Richmond City Jail had dismantled the Caroline I grew up with. The blonde highlights were gone, replaced by dark roots and silver temples pulled into a flat ponytail. She'd lost 30 pounds. No designer dress. A gray jail-issued blouse and dark slacks. No jewelry, no pearl necklace, no mask. She didn't look at her attorney, didn't look at Daniel, didn't look at Richard. She looked at the jury, then at me, then she spoke. "I poisoned my grandmother." The courtroom inhaled, not gasps, something deeper, a collective breath held by 200 people at the same time. Every Sunday for 6 months I brought her tea, chamomile, her favorite. I crushed her digoxin tablets into powder and stirred them into the pot before I carried it to her chair. I watched her drink it. I watched her get weaker. I watched her forget words, lose her balance, call me by my mother's name, and I came back the next Sunday and did it again." Her hands were shaking. She gripped the edge of the table beside her to steady them. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you I didn't know what I was doing. I knew. I'm not going to tell you I was forced. Nobody held a gun to my head." Another pause. Longer. She swallowed hard enough that I could see her throat move from 20 feet away. "But I am going to tell you who taught me that money was more important than people." She turned her head toward Richard. "My father. He raised me to believe our family's reputation was everything. That weakness was unacceptable. That loyalty meant protecting the name, not the person. When grandmother threatened to expose what we'd done with the trust money, he sat me down in his office and said, 'Your grandmother is old. She's confused. Sometimes the kindest thing is to let nature take its course.' He didn't say kill her. He didn't have to. He'd been training me my whole life to hear what he meant without him saying it." She turned to Daniel. Her eyes were dry now, past tears, past the place where tears come from. "And Daniel told me we were building a future together, that after grandmother was gone and the money was secured, we'd be free. I believed him. I was stupid enough to believe a man who was already spending our future on someone else." Richard Thompson stood. His chair scraped against the marble with a sound that cut through the room. "That is a lie." His boardroom voice filled the courtroom at full volume. "I never told her to do anything. She acted on her own. I had no knowledge of the poisoning. None." His attorney grabbed his arm. "Richard, sit down." "She's lying to save herself." He pointed at Caroline, his finger shaking. "She killed my mother and now she's blaming me?" "Order." The judge's gavel cracked 3 times. "Mr. Thompson, sit down or you will be removed." 2 bailiffs moved toward Richard. He stood rigid for 3 seconds, face crimson, veins visible in his neck, before his attorney pulled him back into his seat. Caroline watched her father's outburst without flinching. When silence returned, she spoke quietly, aimed at the jury, not at Richard. "He's doing right now what he's always done, performing, denying, rewriting the story so he's the hero. He's been doing it my whole life. The difference is this time there's a recording, and an email, and a witness who heard him say those words himself." She turned back to the jury. Whatever composure she had left, she gathered like a woman picking up the last pieces of something shattered. "I'm not asking for mercy. I don't deserve it. I killed a woman who baked me chocolate cake on my birthday every year until I was 35. I killed a woman who kept every drawing I ever made as a child in a box under her bed. I killed the only person in my family who ever loved any of us without conditions." Her voice dropped. "I did it for money I'll never touch, for a company that's bankrupt, for a man who was planning to leave me, and for a father who just stood up in this courtroom and called me a liar rather than admit he was part of it." She looked at me. Sister to sister. The same eyes, our mother's eyes, meeting across a courtroom where our grandmother's murder had been laid open for strangers to judge. "I have nothing left to offer except the truth. And the truth is, I did it. I knew it was wrong. And if I could go back to that first Sunday and pour that tea down the drain instead of carrying it to grandmother's chair, I would trade every dollar, every share, every year of my father's approval to do it." She sat down. The courtroom was silent for 6 full seconds. I counted them. "The prosecution invites Avery Thompson to deliver her victim impact statement." I stood. Walked to the front of the courtroom. I didn't bring notes. I didn't need them. I'd been writing this statement in my head for 7 months, on sleepless nights in Margaret's bed, in Dr. Santos's office, in the garden planting gardenias, in front of the mirror the night before the trial began. I stood in the same space where Caroline had just confessed. The wood floor was warm from morning sun through the high windows. Margaret's letter pressed against my heart in my jacket pocket. I looked at the jury, then at Elena, who nodded once, then at Nora, who pressed her hand to her chest, then at Caroline and Richard. My grandmother taught me one thing that mattered more than anything else. She said, "Family is not who you're born to. Family is who protects you." The anchor line, the words from the kitchen floor when I was 12, the words from her journal, the words from the voice memo. They had traveled through every room of this story to arrive here, in a courtroom, spoken into a microphone, heard by strangers who now understood their weight. I lost my mother when I was 12 years old. After that, my grandmother was everything. My mother, my teacher, my protector, my proof that love without conditions exists. She didn't love me because I earned it. She loved me because she chose to. That's what family is supposed to mean. Margaret Hayes was 82 years old. She survived her daughter's death. She survived her son's betrayal. She survived decades of managing a family that treated her generosity as a resource to be extracted. The one thing she didn't survive was the people she trusted most. My sister killed her with tea and heart medication. My father designed the financial escape route. Her fiancé tried to kill me to keep it quiet. And their lawyer built the legal walls to make sure none of it could be challenged. They didn't kill grandmother because they hated her. That's the part that keeps me awake at night. They killed her because she was inconvenient, because she stood between them and $700,000, because she had the audacity to change her will and demand fairness. My grandmother died for $700,000 and the truth. Today, she gets the truth. I stepped down, didn't look back. Returned to my seat. Nora took my hand. Elena reached across and touched my shoulder. 3 women holding each other up in a room built to make people feel small. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 22 minutes. We waited in the hallway outside the courtroom. Elena prayed quietly, rosary beads moving between her fingers. Nora sat with her arm around my shoulders. I stared at the marble floor and counted the veins in the stone. The bailiff opened the door. The jury has reached a verdict. The courtroom reassembled. Everyone standing. The foreman was a woman in her 60s. Gray hair, reading glasses, the kind of woman who looked like she could have been Margaret's neighbor. Daniel Brooks. Murder in the first degree, guilty. Assault with intent to kill, guilty. Conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. Life in prison without parole. Daniel didn't react. The charming investor received the news of his permanent erasure with the same blankness he brought to everything except violence. Caroline Thompson. Murder in the first degree. Guilty. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Guilty. 30 years. Eligible for parole after 15. The judge noted mitigating factors. Her voluntary confession, evidence of manipulation by her father and fiancé, cooperation with the prosecution. She would be 68 at her earliest parole hearing. Older than Margaret was when the poisoning began. Caroline closed her eyes. Didn't cry. Her hands flattened on the table. Richard Thompson. Conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty. Financial fraud. Guilty. Obstruction of justice. Guilty. 5 years suspended. 10 years supervised probation. Full restitution of misappropriated funds. Loss of all interest in Thompson and Locke Construction. The judge added, Mr. Thompson, the court finds your role among the most morally reprehensible acts it has witnessed. You weaponized your own daughter. You betrayed your own mother. Your freedom is a legal technicality, not a moral one. Richard's face was stone. Victor Hale. Per his plea agreement, disbarment, 2 years suspended, 5 years probation. He would never practice law again. The bailiffs prepared to escort the defendants. Daniel was taken first. Shackled, head down, through the side door. He didn't look at anyone. Richard stood slowly. His attorney steadied him by the elbow. He walked toward the door without looking back. At the threshold he paused, not to speak, not to turn. Just paused, the way a man pauses at the edge of something he knows he can never return to. Then he continued. The door closed behind him. Caroline was last. 2 officers flanked her. She rose, smoothed the front of her gray blouse, a habit from another life when surfaces could protect you. She walked toward the door, past the prosecution's table, past Elena, who looked down, past Nora, who looked away. She stopped in front of me. We faced each other, 3 feet apart, a distance measured in verdicts and years and poisoned tea and a childhood we could never get back. Her face was calm, not the performative calm of the old Caroline, something raw. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. The baby is due in March. I didn't move. Name her whatever you want. Raise her however you want. Just don't tell her who I am. Don't let her carry this. A beat. And Avery. Her voice broke for the first time since her confession. The crack ran through it like a fracture through load-bearing stone. Don't let her grow up in Dad's shadow. Not like I did. The bailiff took her arm. Caroline turned, walked through the side door. It closed behind her with the quiet finality of a book ending mid-sentence. The courtroom emptied slowly, the murmur of reporters, the shuffle of shoes on marble, chairs pushed back, the ordinary sounds of a room returning to normal after something that could never be normal. Outside, the courthouse steps, early afternoon, October sunlight turning the limestone columns gold, the oak trees along Broad Street amber, the bronze doors reflecting a sky so blue it hurt. I stood on the top step, Nora beside me squinting in the sun. "It's over," she said. I shook my head. "No, there's one more thing. Something grandmother left me that I haven't opened yet." Nora looked at me. "The sealed clause?" She said it was about the house. She said I'd understand when the time came. I pulled Margaret's letter from my jacket pocket, creased, warm from my body, her handwriting still visible through the folded paper. I think she knew this would happen, all of it, and she planned something beyond the trial, beyond the verdict. I looked out at the city. Richmond spread below me, the fan district where Margaret's house sat waiting with new gardenias that hadn't bloomed yet, and a sealed envelope on the kitchen table. She always built things to last. This isn't finished. 3 months after the trial. January, Richmond winter. Bare trees along the fan district. Gray sky, the kind of cold that seeps into old houses through the window frames. Margaret's house creaked around me the way it always had. Patricia Langley sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Elena served tea, where Nora cooked congee, where Margaret ate lemon pound cake on Sunday afternoons for 40 years. Patricia placed the sealed envelope between us. Margaret's handwriting, "To be opened when the truth is known." I picked it up, ran my thumb across the letters, broke the seal. Inside was a single page. Not a legal document, a letter. Margaret's voice, one last time. "My dear Avery, if you're reading this, it means the truth came out. I knew it would. I knew because I knew you. This house is yours now, not as property, not as investment, as a purpose. I bought this house 40 years ago because I wanted a place where someone who had lost everything could start over. That's what it was for me after your grandfather died. That's what it became for you after your mother died. I want you to make it that again. Not just for you, but for others. There are children in this city who have lost their mothers, their families, their belief that anyone will protect them. You were one of those children. You know what it feels like. And you know what it feels like when one person, just one, says, 'I see you. You matter. You're not alone.' Build something, Avery. You're an architect. This is what you were made for, not buildings, foundations. All my love always, Margaret." I folded the letter, pressed it against my chest the way I'd held the journal, the voice memo phone, every piece of her I'd been carrying since the funeral. "She didn't leave me a house," I said to Patricia. "She left me a blueprint." February, a social worker from the Virginia Department of Social Services called. Caroline gave birth to a girl on March 2nd, 3 weeks early, at the Virginia Correctional Center for Women. Healthy, 6 pounds, 4 ounces, dark hair. She looked like Margaret. Both biological parents incarcerated. Under Virginia law, the child would enter the foster care system within 72 hours unless a family member filed for kinship custody. I was the only eligible relative. Richard was deemed unfit. Nobody else. "You have no obligation, Ms. Thompson. The system will provide—" The system. I knew what the system meant. I'd designed transitional housing for children aging out of foster care. I'd seen the numbers. I knew where those stories end. 2 voices in my head during the days that followed. Nora, on the phone. "You don't owe Caroline anything. You've given enough. You've lost enough. Nobody would blame you for saying no." Dr. Santos in session. "The child didn't choose her parents. She didn't choose the circumstances of her birth. The question isn't what Caroline deserves. The question is what the child needs. I sat in Margaret's reading chair, the quilt on my lap, the letter in my pocket, the house around me, the house Margaret turned into a purpose. And Margaret's voice, from the kitchen floor 22 years ago, from the journal, from the voice memo, from the courtroom, from the sealed letter. The same words carried through every room of this story, like a thread stitched through the spine of a building. Family is not who you're born to. Family is who protects you. I picked up the phone, called the social worker. I'll take her. March 15th. I brought the baby home. Nora was there, Elena was there, living in the guest cottage since the trial. Not as employment, as family. We stood in the living room, the same room where Daniel confessed. Where Margaret's photograph fell and shattered. The photograph had been reframed, new glass, same picture. Those sharp, warm eyes watching from the mantelpiece. I held the baby, looked at Margaret's face in the frame. Her name is Margaret. Elena crossed herself. Nora wiped her eyes. Little Margaret yawned, stretched one tiny fist toward the light coming through the window, the same light that fell on her great-grandmother's reading chair every afternoon for 40 years. I want to tell you what happened after that, not in detail, in flashes, the way you remember a life when you look back at it from a distance. Year 1. I redesigned the ground floor of the house, opened the front 2 rooms as a drop-in center for at-risk teenagers, kids in foster care, kids aging out of the system, kids who needed a safe place after school, and someone who'd listen. I called it the Hayes House. Elena ran the kitchen. Nora designed the sign for the front door. Year 3. Little Margaret took her first steps in the garden. The gardenias I planted after the trial had grown thick and tall, white blooms every summer. She toddled between the bushes, reaching for petals with fat fingers. I photographed the moment, framed it, put it on the mantelpiece beside the original. Year 5. I received a letter from Caroline, prison stationery, careful handwriting. Is she healthy? Is she happy? Does she like chocolate cake? Grandmother always made me chocolate cake. I wrote back. 1 paragraph. She's healthy, she's happy, she loves chocolate cake. I didn't write more, not yet. Year 7. The Hayes house expanded. I converted the second floor into transitional bedrooms for teenagers who needed temporary housing. A local foundation provided funding. The Richmond Times-Dispatch ran a profile. Architect turns grandmother's home into sanctuary for at-risk youth. Margaret would have clipped the article and stuck it to the refrigerator with a magnet. Year 10. Little Margaret was 10. Quiet, observant, kind. She had her great-grandmother's sharp eyes and my architect's hands. She built model houses out of popsicle sticks and cardboard and asked me about her mother once. I told her the truth. Age-appropriate, careful, honest. Your mother made a terrible mistake. She's paying for it, but she loved you enough to ask someone she trusted to take care of you. Margaret thought about it for a long time. Then, she trusted you? I said yes. She nodded. Then I trust you too. Year 15. Margaret was 15, tall, dark-haired, her great-grandmother's cheekbones. She volunteered at the Hayes house on weekends, helped younger kids with homework, organized the pantry, planted gardenias in the garden every spring. She knew the full story by then. I told her on her 13th birthday, all of it, the digoxin, the tea, the trial, the desk with the hidden compartment. She listened without interrupting. When it was over, she looked at me and said something I will carry for the rest of my life. Great-grandmother Margaret built the desk with a secret because she trusted you to find it. You built this house with a secret too. You hid love inside it. A Saturday in October, 15 years after the sentencing. Caroline was released on parole, 64 years old, hair completely white, thin, weathered, carrying a plastic bag with her belongings through a chain-link gate. I drove to the correctional facility alone, didn't bring Margaret, not yet. Caroline saw me, stopped, 10 feet apart, the same distance as the courtroom but without the bailiffs and the judge and the jury. Just 2 sisters on opposite sides of a line, only one of them had crossed. I didn't hug her, didn't reach out. I opened the passenger door and stepped back. Get in. We drove in silence. Richmond appeared through the windshield. The James River, the church steeples, the Fan District oaks turning gold. Where are we going? She asked. Home. Dinner at Margaret's kitchen table, 3 place settings. I cooked the meal myself. Roast chicken, green beans, cornbread, lemon pound cake. Margaret's recipes, everyone. Elena helped with the pound cake before going home for the evening. She wanted to give us space. Little Margaret came downstairs, 15, tall, dark hair, sharp eyes. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Caroline, the woman she'd seen only in photographs and heard about only in careful, honest conversations. Caroline's breath caught. Her hand went to her mouth. She looks like grandmother. That was the point. After dinner, little Margaret went upstairs. The kitchen was quiet. 2 sisters at a table where their grandmother once sat. Caroline held a cup of chamomile tea. The bitter irony not lost on either of us. Her hands trembled around the ceramic. Do you forgive me? I took a long time to answer. Looked at the kitchen window, the garden outside, white gardenias glowing under the porch light, the garden that died and was replanted, the house that held a murder and now holds a sanctuary. I choose to forgive you, not because you deserve it, not because the pain is gone, not because what you did can be undone. I looked at her. I forgive you because grandmother taught me that holding on to poison is just another way of drinking it, and this family has had enough poison. A pause. But forgiveness isn't trust, Caroline. Trust is built. You want to be part of Margaret's life. You earn it, day by day, year by year, the way grandmother earned my love, by showing up, by telling the truth, by protecting instead of taking. She nodded, didn't argue, didn't cry. The nod of a woman who understands the terms are fair because the alternative is nothing at all. This story taught me things I didn't want to learn. It taught me that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. The people closest to you can be the ones who hurt you deepest, not because they're evil, but because proximity gives them access to the parts of you that can't be armored. It taught me that silence is not peace. For years I stayed quiet because I thought keeping the peace meant keeping the family. It didn't. It meant keeping the lie. It taught me that the truth costs everything and saves everything at the same time. The day I walked into Dr. Calloway's office and saw those test results, my world ended. But it also began. Because the truth, even when it's ugly, even when it means losing people you love, is the only foundation strong enough to build a life on. I'm an architect. I know foundations. And it taught me that forgiveness is not a feeling. It's a decision, a daily one. Some mornings I wake up furious at Caroline. Some mornings I look at little Margaret and I'm grateful. Most mornings I'm both, and that's okay. Forgiveness doesn't mean the anger is gone. It means the anger doesn't get to drive anymore. My grandmother died because her family chose money over love. But her legacy, the house, the trust, the garden, this girl who carries her name, that legacy says the opposite. It says love wins. Not easily, not quickly, not without scars, but it wins. I told you this story because I needed to tell it, but I also told it because I know that some of you are living inside your own version of it right now. Maybe your family treats you like you don't matter. Maybe someone you trusted took something that wasn't theirs, your money, your dignity, your voice. Maybe you've been told you're crazy for questioning things that don't feel right. Maybe you've been silent for so long you've forgotten what your own voice sounds like. I want you to hear me. You are not crazy, you are not weak, you are not alone, and the truth, your truth, matters. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear about it. Leave me a comment. Tell me, would you have forgiven Caroline? Would you have taken the baby? What would Margaret have done? I read every single comment, and some of the most powerful stories I've ever heard have come from people just like you, sitting in their living rooms, watching this video, and finally saying out loud what they've been carrying for years. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. A friend, a sister, a mother, anyone who's been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to make them feel safe. And if you want to stay with me, If you want more stories about people who refused to stay silent, people who fought back, people who chose truth over comfort, hit that subscribe button. I'll be here, just like Margaret was there for me. Because family isn't who you're born to. Family is who protects you. And right now, this channel, this community, that's family too. This story is fictionalized for dramatic effect.